So as this channel grows, I have to keep in mind that a lot of people have not been around from the beginning. A lot of people don't know what Disciple Dojo is about. And one of the things that I get comments on way more than I ever expected is people saying, why do you have all those action figures around you? Or I can't take your Bible teaching seriously because you're surrounded by a bunch of dolls. Or my favorite, why are you criticizing people for praying to icons when you're surrounded by your idols? Now that one comes from a meme. Somebody memed my review of the Orthodox Study Bible and put a screenshot that implied that I was, as a Protestant, anti-icons. The funny thing is the screenshot they chose was the part when I believe I was holding up the Orthodox Study Bible and saying how beautiful the reproductions of the icons were in that study Bible. But you know, people don't actually bother watching videos. They see a meme and they run with it. And so there's a meme going around that I'm some Protestant that bashes icons in Orthodox or Catholic worship, which I don't at all. Or in another video review I did of the Bart Bible app, I was wearing my old school, like 1980s Thor t-shirt, the comic book, the Mighty Thor. And I got a number of comments saying, Thor's a pagan god. How can you share a Bible app while you're worshiping a pagan god on your t-shirt? And it made me laugh because I just can't understand that mindset. I can't understand that people who can't differentiate between cartoon superheroes and comic books that you read as a kid, which me being a Gen Xer, you know, I grew up late 70s, early 80s reading Marvel comics, Thor, Daredevil, Iron Man, Captain America. I even grew up reading classic mythology. I love the Greek and the Norse and the Roman myths. I knew all the names of the gods. And I mean, that's just kind of how I was raised. Even as a preacher's kid, was raised to be literarily well read and to know the lore, folklore, mythology, modern pop culture lore of the culture that we live in. So all the things, I guess, that some really restrictive Christian parents didn't let their kids watch, cartoons like He-Man, Thundercats, or old school horror movies like Dracula and Frankenstein, or Clash of the Titans back in the 80s, you know, all these things that so many Christian parents were just terrified that their kids were going to run off and become Satanists over. It's just stuff I grew up with. For us, it was imagination. It was fun imagination. And as I grew older, I still look back and I cherish those times of playing He-Man with my dad and of watching Thundercats and G.I. Joe every day when I got home from school, getting up in the morning, catching episodes of Gummy Bears or Gumby. These were the things that I loved, that I grew up on. And so it always, well, one, there's a nostalgia factor. Like some of these toys I've had. Mr. T right here. Like I got this for Christmas when I was, I don't know, 5, 6. And the A-Team was real big. My grandma bought me and my cousin Stuart Mr. T dolls because we love B.A. Baracus. You know, these like pop culture, comic books, superheroes, that's just what I grew up on. I learned to draw. I literally thought for probably up until maybe my senior year of college that I was going to be some type of either comic book artist, graphic novel illustrator. I mean, I minored in Japanese for a year with the goal of moving to Japan to study illustration and then to come back and find work here in the States doing illustration, graphic novels. So it's just an inseparable part of my life, and it always has been. And a lot of people aren't aware, and because I look at the numbers and I see the analytics, that most people don't know that we have a whole playlist here on the channel called Superhero Seminary. And Superhero Seminary, the idea is combining my nerdy 80s nostalgia and cheesy action figures I grew up with and comic book characters I grew up with kind of like modern geek culture, but using it to convey biblical, theological, or exegetical concepts. So rather than talking here in a straightforward video about various word study fallacies, I thought, why not let He-Man talk to Orko and explain what they are to him? Rather than doing a teaching where I lay out systematically the doctrine of the Trinity and the different views that Christians have held of it, I thought, why not just portray the mystery through somebody who is very familiar with the mysterious cosmos and all its vastness, and that was Silver Surfer. So our very first Superhero Seminary video was Silver Surfer talking about the Trinity. And who better to talk about the doctrines where we will be taken up on a cloud than one of the most famous cloud riders in all of animation history, Son Goku. And who knows more about snapping their finger and a huge chunk of the world disappearing suddenly, causing all kinds of chaos, than Thanos himself? Or which 80s icon probably would wrestle the most with Jesus's commands not to call your brother a fool? I'm going to guess Mr. T. Or what about the concept that Sensei Johnny Lawrence made famous of no mercy in Cobra Kai? Well, we got him to talk about it. Now, some of the videos were made first, and then I decided, you know what, it would be good to do a longer unpacking of this. So for instance, Professor Ben Grimm talks about why Pharaoh would harden God's heart. But then we also have a longer video here that treats that topic in more detail. And the same thing with the rapture passage and introduction to Revelation. We did a Doctor Strange take on it, and then we've done videos here on the channel that deal in more detail with it. So a lot of you are new. You don't know about these videos. They are just kind of buried down in the algorithm. What I thought would be fun to do is just string them all together and just have one big Superhero Seminary marathon that you can just go to and click on and bookmark and see all of them that we've done so far. Now, I have more that I would like to do, but they actually, I've said before, they take longer than all the other things we do here at Disciple Dojo, by far. It's not even close. So until newer ones come out, I thought instead of having each one separately where you have to find it in the playlist, let's just put them all together and just have one bookmarkable video that you can enjoy, skip around to whichever part you want to see, and you can share it with people. If you know people that are into nerdy 80s nostalgia, if you know people that grew up on pop culture and comic books, if you know anybody who may not sit and listen to a sermon podcast, but they might get a kick out of listening to The Mandalorian retell the Book of Acts, then this is the perfect video for you to send them. So I hope you find this helpful. All these videos are separate here in the playlist on the channel, so check them out, share them as need be. We just want to get this ridiculousness out there into the zeitgeist of this little corner of YouTube. So for those of you who have wondered, what's up with all these action figures? Why is this guy surrounded by action figures if he's trying to teach the Bible? That's why. It's part of this ministry. If you don't like it, I don't care. You're not the target audience for this channel. So keep on moving. Find some boring teacher that's just going to be surrounded by a boring background. This isn't the right place for you. All right, without further ado, sit back and enjoy this marathon of Superhero Seminary episodes.
Theologically speaking, most of you don't know that aside from being the herald of Galactus, I also have a degree in advanced theology, biblical studies, ancient Near East culture, Greco-Roman rhetoric. I'm a busy guy, but I'm also a smart guy, and I have cosmic power, so I can do this stuff. So don't worry about all the details. But basically, I hear people denying the Trinity. Now, as a good Marvelite, I know the Trinity exists. He's been depicted in numerous ways over the years in the panels of my comics. But he's a mystery. And when people say mystery, they usually think, well, that's just a cop-out. You know, that's just saying we don't know, so we just say mystery. But some things are legitimately a mystery, and you humans know that. And I know you know that. Science tells you that. See, think about light. Yeah, light. You know, that stuff that's all around you. That stuff that streams through the cosmos at an absolute physical limit of speed. That's 186,282 miles per second for the scientifically illiterate reader among you. Of course, that's slow motion compared to how fast I can go on my cosmic board because of stuff. Anyway, why is the Trinity, the concept of the Trinity, and light, why do those two things make me think of each other? Because the rise of modern physics in the last century, among your people, light became weird. Yeah, light's weird. See, many people on your planet had assumed, Reed Richards and all those folks, that light was made up of tiny particles. And they named them photons. Kind of a cool sounding name. These photons shot across space, obviously at the speed of light. And these little pellets of energy zoomed through the universe. No big deal. That's what light was. But then there was this experiment. It's called the double slit experiment, or Young's experiment. And it pretty much changed all of that. I could get into the science of it, but rather than just go YouTube, double slit experiment, look it up. There's a great video by my friend Dr. Quantum. He explains it well, and it's even got nifty computer graphics. The result of this experiment proved that light was a wave, but it was also a particle, but it was also a wave. See, that's what makes people crazy about this double slit experiment, is it shows that light is somehow both. And that's weird because particles are fundamentally different things than waves. It's not like they're kind of similar. No, they're fundamentally different. Light particles, light waves. Those are two things that just can't go together. You can't fit them together. You can't make them work. You can't even have thought concepts where they seem to coexist. And yet, that's exactly what light was. Now, any attempt to offer an analogy of how light can be both particle-like and wave-like in its properties, it's going to break down at some point. That's what drives physicists crazy. And furthermore, explaining how light can be both particle-like and wave-like in exact, precise detail is something that takes the highest trained physicist's entire textbook's worth of writing and equations to do. It's almost always inexplicable to the average person on the street. So what does this have to do with the Trinity? Well, everything. We usually don't require physicists to explain the wave-particle duality of light in a single post in an online forum or a single meme or a bumper sticker or a flyer. Nor do we smugly or flippantly dismiss them if they can't do this. That's crazy. We understand it takes some thought and it's a little complicated. Likewise, physicists usually don't get annoyed at people with no physics or mathematics training when their attempts to explain light's dual nature aren't understood and immediately accepted. At least the good ones don't. There are always stuck-up physicists with no social skills, Dr. Doom types who berate the plebeian ignoramus who dare question them, but they're generally disdained by level-headed colleagues. See, most people realize intuitively that the essence of light itself should be something that's hard, if not impossible, to fully grasp, much less simplify. So why do we expect people to do the same when it comes to the very source of all light, God Himself? Now, of course, many Christians, particularly clergy and teachers who don't know how to adequately answer honest skeptics, have used the whole "it's a mystery, just believe" response as means of avoiding discussion of the Trinity altogether. That's their fault. They're not doing their job. They're abdicating their responsibilities. They're being bad clergy. So blame them. Don't blame the theology itself. All this does is create more suspicion and doubt in the hearts and minds of people who are met with such a response from these so-called clergy. It's foolish, I would even suggest sinful, to respond to honest questions about the nature of God by telling the questioner, "Oh, just believe." There's a reason the early church wrestled for centuries to find the right words to express the nature of God's being as triune. And they still fell short. Like light's wave-particle duality, the Trinity cannot be explained adequately by analogy. It can't. There is no analogy for the Trinity. If the Trinity is true, there are no analogies for it by definition, because it is describing the nature of God Himself, and God has no analogy. Every attempt to explain the Trinity through object lessons or analogies ends up devolving into heresy, even if it's well-intentioned heresy. Ice, water, steam analogy, that's modalist heresy. The shell, white, yolk of an egg analogy, that's tritheism heresy. The shamrock analogy, that's some of both. All illustrations of the Trinity are inadequate, but this does not negate the validity of God's nature as triune any more than pop explanation failures to analogize negate the wave-particle duality of light. So what should we do? How do we understand and communicate the Trinity in a way that's not heretical, overly simplistic, or misleading? First, I would say we should stop using the, quote, doctrine of the Trinity as an authority we appeal to. Just because God's nature is three in one doesn't mean the doctrine formulated by patristic theologians to explain it are themselves sacred or authoritative. Many people are on the assumption that a church council, usually Nicaea is the supposed culprit, invented the Trinity, or is more often charged like Da Vinci Code level, quote, historians, that they just took it from pagan myths and simply declared it to be church doctrine. No, this is bad history, it's foolishness. Ignore people when they make these claims. They're not educated. From the very beginning, Jesus' earliest followers declared two truths with total conviction, and they were even willing to die for it. From day one, Jesus' followers claimed, there is only one God who could be worshipped and prayed to, and that's Yahweh, the God of Israel. That's the bedrock claim of the earliest Christians. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They all grew up as good Jewish boys and girls, reciting the Shema every day. They knew monotheism is the way to go. But there was also another belief that these Christians were adamant about, even to the point of being willing to die. And that second truth is this: Jesus of Nazareth was to be worshipped and prayed to. Jesus of Nazareth, from the earliest Christians, the very first followers, prayed to him and worshipped him. Now this is the wave particle duality of Scripture when it comes to the nature of God. You see, those are two fundamentally incompatible ideas. There is only one God, and Jesus is worshipped and prayed to. That is wave and particle of the theological world. And can it be easily explained? No. Did everyone immediately accept and believe it? No. But what became the doctrine of the Trinity was the result of nearly 3 centuries of wrestling with these two unavoidable truths, both taught in the Hebrew Bible and Greek New Testament. To let go of either was to reject a portion of Scripture in favor of another portion of Scripture, and that's something Jesus, as well as his apostles, saw no need to do. Likewise, for those who believe in the gospel of Jesus, and I'm not talking about unbelievers, this is in-house discussion here, folks. If you claim to believe in the gospel of Jesus, who is the embodiment of God's very word, according to John 1:1, it's impossible to reject either of these two truths. There is only one God, yet somehow Jesus is in some way one with God. Can a skeptic understand this? Maybe. Should we expect a skeptic to understand this? Probably not. Should we get annoyed or upset when a skeptic ridicules what they think the Trinity teaches? Definitely not. Unless they're being disingenuous and not really seeking to understand the Christian faith, which is always the case with the Wikipedia experts out there who like to post in online forums about how Jesus and God are all fairy tales like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Those people, you can recognize them by their annoying tenor and just their general lack of education on a subject that they clearly look down on. Those are the swine before whom you probably don't want to cast too many pearls. But for honest skeptics, intellectually honest skeptics who are also humble in their attitude and are willing to learn, willing to follow truth wherever it goes, which we should all be. Those are the ones who you need to be able to sit and talk to and explain why it is that the church came to believe what it believes about the nature of Jesus. So for what it's worth, personally, I reject the whole classic top-down approach when discussing the Trinity. I opt for a more organic bottom-up approach. See, a top-down approach starts with the doctrine of the Trinity and tries to explain the biblical text in light of that doctrine. This is fine for those who already accept the doctrine, but I prefer the latter method. The latter method seeks to explain the biblical text and how they led to the formulation of the doctrine as people wrestled with their implications regarding the nature and the identity of Jesus in a monotheistic Hebrew context. But at the end of the day, we must realize we're not solving equations. We're discussing the very nature of God Almighty, the one above all. Should we expect to be able to fully and easily comprehend his inward essence? Good luck with that. We can't even fully grasp the implications of the nature of light. How much less should we expect to be able to comprehend the nature of the one who spoke light into existence to begin with? That's just crazy. So think about it. Ponder these things. I'm not going to spoon feed you the answer. I want you to study. I want you to learn. I want you to grow, because I'm the Silver Surfer and I look out for humanity, and well, those are all good things. So ponder it, meditate on it, surf around thinking about it. I don't know, whatever you do. But at the end of the day, keep in mind that if you can't explain how light itself is both particle and wave, then why do you think you should be able to easily explain how God himself can be both human and divine? Let that put it into perspective. Let's bring some mystery back into this. Real mystery, not fake mystery like I don't know, so just call it a mystery, but genuine mystery. The stuff that the cosmos is made of, the thing that drives scientific knowledge, the thing that drives further study. That mystery. Let's stick with that. Let's leave the pop theology to the pop theologians. Let's be better. All right, I gotta go. There's a star or something that I need to go look at or surf around. So take care, and I'll talk to you later sometime about other things.
Good morning, class. Professor Aquaman here. No, not the one in the movies that your moms are all crazy over. The original one. Me, Aquaman, Justice League. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you today about the theology of the sea. Yeah, the sea, the ocean, the place where I live, the place where I rule, the fish that I talk to. It's not a joke, I can talk to fish. It's a cool power, so back off. So, the sea in the Bible plays a major role. In fact, at the very beginning, when God's creating, back in Genesis it says, and the Spirit of God was hovering, and it uses bird-like imagery, avian imagery, Hawkman would love that, of God's Spirit hovering over the waters, over the sea, over the abyss. Now, this is important because in the ancient world that the Bible authors are surrounded by, the Babylonians and the Egyptians and all of the ancient peoples, the sea represented the forces of evil and chaos. Now, I could have told them differently, but back then, that's what they thought. The sea represented everything evil, and symbolically, that's what it came to mean, because the sea was uncertain. Remember, this is before such things as scuba gear, or swim masks, or Jacques Cousteau, before people saw the beauty of my realm. Now we go on vacation at the sea, and we swim, and we snorkel, and we scuba dive, and it's wonderful. But to the peoples of the ancient world, the sea was a deadly place. It was filled with giant monsters. You know, they'd haul up their fishing nets and big chunks would be taken out of some of the fish or even some of the nets. Or occasionally teeth or some types of skeletons or things would wash up on shore. There was no way to look under the waters, especially if you lived in areas where the water was opaque. The belief was that the sea was untamable and it was chaotic. And so it came in the ancient world outside of Scripture to represent chaos. And in the mythologies, it was often represented by some type of serpent or dragon, a chaos monster. There was Tiamat, there was Lotan, there was Python, Set. There were all of these different chaos creatures, and they were seen as primordial, going back even before creation. And so in the different creation accounts, the gods had to do battle against these chaos forces in order to bring about the calmness and the goodness that is creation. So for instance, in the Babylonian account, you'd have Marduk slaying the sea serpent Tiamat, and as he famously says, I split her body in half like a shellfish. And out of one half he used to create the sky, and the other half he used to create the land. Well, that was one of the ancient Near East creation myth. In the Bible, it picks up on this because the Bible was a book written in that milieu, in that ancient Near East culture. But the Bible takes those ancient Near East myths and images about the sea and symbolism of the sea, and it gives them a twist. Because in the Bible, the sea is nothing more than the place where God begins to create. God speaks, and the waters obey. The Spirit of God, the Word of God, and the Creator God work together, and they overcome, ironically, the forces of chaos, not through any battle, but through speaking them into existence to begin with. So in Genesis it says God created the great sea monsters. And some translations say great creatures of the sea, or I think King James even said whales, but it's the word sea monster. And it's the thing that the other ancient Near East peoples were all terrified of. But in Scripture, these things are seen as being nothing more than part of creation, to show the sovereignty of the Hebrew God. So all throughout Scripture, you can trace this theme of the sea, and you can see how it develops. When the psalmists speak of God walking upon the waters, or when God gives his account of creation and how he said the waters can go this far and no further, or he's established the land and it shall not be moved. These are all images of God having sovereignty over not just the sea, as in the place where I live, but the forces of chaos or evil themselves. There's symbolism in this imagery that you miss if you don't understand how the sea was viewed by the ancient Hebrews. And it even comes across in the New Testament. Think back to the account where Jesus went across. What did he do? He calmed the waters on the Sea of Galilee. Calming the waters, speaking to the waves. Remember his disciples' reactions? They were terrified. They said, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Why? Because they knew their Hebrew Bible. They knew that only God, the Father, Yahweh, has sovereignty over the wind and the waves, the forces of chaos, the sea. After crossing the Sea of Galilee, Jesus goes and he encounters a man with demons. And if you remember the story, he casts the demons out of the man. And the demons, there's thousands of them. That's why they call themselves Legion. They flee into a herd of pigs, unclean animals. Animals that represented all of the uncleanness, and demons represented uncleanness, and men possessed by demons living among tombs represented uncleanness. Everything about the story is darkness and chaos and uncleanness. And when the demons are cast out into the pigs, where do they go? They rush headlong into the sea. And in the gospel, that word is not the typical word that's used to describe the Sea of Galilee, but in that account, it's the word abusas, where we get the term abyss, which is the ancient word for the chaotic realm of evil. There's so much symbolism loaded in this verse that gets missed because people don't notice how the Bible uses imagery throughout, from Genesis to Revelation. And speaking of Revelation, at the end, when all is said and done, when evil is judged and creation is restored, there's a line in Revelation chapter 21, verse 1, and it says, and there was no sea. In the new creation that John envisions, there's no sea. The sea is no more. Why? Does God hate the sea? No, remember, he created semi-realm. He spoke it into being. He created the creatures in it, and he declared it very good. So this isn't literally saying there's not going to be an ocean in the new creation. There's not going to be large bodies of water. No, as my colleague, Dr. Strange, told you in the introduction to Revelation, which you haven't seen that video, go check it out. Revelation is filled with symbolic imagery, and it would have communicated to the ancient readers not that God hates the ocean, but that at the end of the day, when all is said and done, when evil is vanquished, even the very source of evil, even the thing that in people's minds is synonymous with chaos and uncertainty and evil, will be no more. So as you're reading the Bible, look at how the sea is used. Look at how metaphors for the oceans and the waves and the waters, and see what the author is doing, pun intended, because there's a lot more going on here than just the literal plain surface reading, and we miss it sometimes when we don't read closely. But that's what we and the other faculty here at Superhero Seminary want you to do. We want you to be careful, close readers of Scripture, and we're trying to give you the tools that'll help you do that. Okay, it's time to go. Class is over. I've got to go swim and talk to fish and do all the things that the other Justice League members make fun of me for. Take care. Happy studies. Go see the Aquaman movie if you want to. Total revisionist history. I can't believe they cast this big, handsome hunk of a man instead of me. How insulting. But anyway, whatever. This is the real Aquaman here, saying goodbye from Superhero Seminary. Remember, if you like these videos and you want to see more of them, be sure to subscribe and like us on Facebook. We could really use the support, as seminaries are nonprofit organizations. Especially this one. We could use the support. Seriously, go subscribe. Okay, I'm done now for real. Bye.
Good afternoon, class. I'm your professor, Kal-El, or Superman, as I'm more commonly known. And I want to talk to you today about the Superman verse in the Bible. Everyone's favorite verse. Everyone has this tattooed or embroidered or in some other way prominently displayed whenever they want to achieve something. The verse, I'm sure you've guessed, is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, this verse is translated in different ways by different translations, but generally the translation that's quoted as a Christian mantra is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. There's only one problem. That's not what this verse says. And here at Superhero Seminary, we want to equip you to be able to handle Scripture correctly, even superbly, pun intended. And knowing what this verse says is very helpful in avoiding what we call folk theology or folk religion. And that is the beliefs that arise from taking surface readings of texts in English versions without doing serious study, what we scholars call exegesis, of the passage in question. And Philippians 4:13 is one of those passages, because Philippians 4:13 does not actually say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What it actually says in Greek is panta iskuo en toi endunamante me. Literally, this translates to everything, panta, iskuo, I am enduring, or I am able. This is not the verb I can do. I can do is another verb in Greek, poieo. This is iskuo, and it has to do with enduring or being able. And then the rest of the verse, in or through the one strengthening me. So what's this passage saying? Is this saying that you can be a Christian Superman? Is this saying that you can hit the game-winning three-pointer through Christ who strengthens you? That you can knock out the heavyweight champ through Christ who strengthens you? That you can be the greatest fighter in the octagon through Christ who strengthens you? Is it saying you can run that race, you can pass that test, you can get that job? Is this the Christian version of The Secret? No, it's not. And a simple look at the context of the passage shows you exactly what Paul is talking about in this passage. Let's take a look at how a modern translation, the Common English Bible, which has come out in the past few years, handles this passage, because I think it does a superb job in this passage in particular. Look at the context. Philippians 4:13 comes after Philippians 4:12. And Philippians 4:12 says, I know the experience of being in need and of having more than enough. I have learned the secret of being content
in any and every circumstance, whether full or hungry, whether having plenty or being poor. I can endure all these things through the power of the one who gives me strength. And even the NIV, back when the NIV was originally published, it used to say, I can do all things. Now the NIV 2011, which is the most recent update as of the making of this video, has changed it and corrected this verse. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. All this. What is the this? Well, it's what Paul has just been talking about. It's whether you have much or whether you have little, whether you're at your wit's end or whether you're at the height of your power, whether you're saving the planet or whether you're getting beat down by doomsday. Whatever the situation, if God has called you in that situation and put you there, you can have faith that in Christ, through Messiah, you can endure, you can withstand, you can come through all these things. And that's the key to this verse and the meaning to this verse, which is obscured in different English translation. But it's that Greek word iskuo. I am able, I can endure. So the next time you see this verse, you don't have to chide someone for quoting it to give them that little bit of, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. But just know that this is not the Christian version of the little engine that could. This verse has a powerful meaning when read, like all of Scripture, in context, which is what we, the faculty here at Superhero Seminary, always encourage. Reading the context of the passage in question in the original languages if possible, or multiple translations if the original languages are not available to you, and studying scripture in its original setting rather than turning it into a cool verse that we get tattooed or embroidered or that becomes our memory verse for the day. Because remember, verses and chapters were never written by the original author. They came much, much later. So, Philippians 4:13, if it's your favorite verse, it can still be your favorite verse. It just has an even deeper meaning. Even when you're not feeling like a Superman, even when you're feeling like you just swallowed a couple of tons worth of kryptonite, know that if you're in Christ, He is the one who is strengthening you to do whatever He has called you to do, but not necessarily anything you think you can do. That's it for this edition of Superhero Seminary. We will see you next time. Be sure to subscribe by hitting the button below or by liking us and following us on Facebook. Links are in the description. We hope to see you back in future classes.
Welcome to Superhero Seminary. I'm your professor, Dr. Stephen Strange. Doctor, not Mr. Didn't spend all those years at Tibetan sorcerer school to be called Mr. You will refer to me as Doctor, or you can call me Steve. I'm going to talk about the book of Revelation today. Why? Because I'm the master of all things strange and weird and intimidating and otherworldly, and Revelation has been described as all of those things. Revelation is widely believed to be the most mysterious and scary book in the Bible. This is unfortunate because for the early Christians, Revelation was actually the most comforting, and ironically was written to help make things clearer to them regarding what they were living through and how it all fit in with God's overall plan of redemptive history. Revelation was written to make things clear. Therefore, it should be studied by Christians today. Now, not in order to chart out various end-time scenarios or decide which world leader is which beastly creature of the book, but rather to hear the voice of Jesus to his people throughout the ages, including his people today. You see, first thing first, the name of the book is Revelation, not Revelations. Whenever you hear somebody start talking about, well, you know what the book of Revelation says, brother, you can ignore that person. If they can't get the title of the book right, they certainly can't be trusted with its contents. There's no S involved. It's revelation. It's the revelation of Jesus. In fact, that's what the book claims to be, the revelation of Jesus. The first word in the book is the Greek word apocalypsis. And it sounds like apocalypse because it's where that term came from, but it doesn't have anything to do with the weird guy with tubes and pipes and weird lips that tangles with the X-Men from time to time. It has nothing to do with that. Literally, apocalypsis means to lift the veil. Think about a car show. If you're a car person, I don't need a car. I can transport interdimensionally, so cars are worthless to me. But some of you plebeians like to get around that way. Think about a car show, though. You go to a car show, on the pedestal there's a car, but it's covered with a sheet. There's sometimes a woman in an evening gown for some reason. And then there's usually a moment of great excitement where there's maybe a drum roll, and the sheet that's covering the car is lifted
lifted off. And you can see, ta-da, here's the beautiful new Mitsubishi, whatever. I don't know, choose your car company. Well, that is a revelation. That is an apocalypsis. That is lifting the veil off of the car. That is the apocalypsis, the revelation of Toyota or whatever. That's what the book of Revelation is. It's revealing Jesus as he truly is to his followers throughout the world, but particularly in first century Asia Minor. One of the most amazing but saddest ironies in the history of Bible study is that this very book, written to make things clear, is actually one of the most misunderstood, intimidating, and divisive books in the entire Bible. Now, of course, while some of this is due to sinful pride and divisiveness on the part of interpreters, much of it's due simply to a lack of awareness, not only of the book's historical context, but also a general unfamiliarity with the Hebrew Bible or Second Temple Jewish literature, from which Revelation's imagery draws heavily. Any reading of Revelation that doesn't take these into account will almost certainly veer off course and be far from the intended meaning of John's apocalyptic vision. Apocalyptic writings, they go as far back as the Old Testament prophets, Daniel and Zechariah. They were extremely popular during the first few centuries BC and up and through the 2nd century AD. There's a lot of them out there. You can read them. They're public domain. Apocalyptic writings usually consist of visions and sometimes interpretations of those visions given to a human recipient by a heavenly messenger, which seek to provide clarity, encouragement, and comfort to a persecuted minority at the hands of an oppressive ruling majority. Apocalypses were never intended only to communicate events that would happen at the end of time. Rather, they were written to communicate current or imminent events that the community or the nation was about to experience or was experiencing already. It's unfortunate that in the English language, apocalyptic has come to mean end of the world, because that is most certainly not what it meant in the original Koine Greek. So get that out of your mind when you read Revelation. You're not reading just a description of the end of the world. It's so much more than that. In fact, ignoring the genre of the book is one of the biggest mistakes many readers, especially many so-called prophecy experts, make when interpreting and teaching Revelation. By the way, when you see somebody referred to as a, quote, prophecy expert, just walk away. You're better off reading biblical scholars and actual theologians. So this is often, though in fairness not always, results in wild scenarios of raptures, credit card chip implants, even protests against peace attempts in parts of the world that people see as having end-time significance. And all three of these things have been taught by prominent evangelical Christians in the public eye within the last 20 years, which is beyond unfortunate. It's just flat out irresponsible. Apocalyptic literature was never meant to be read purely literally. And this is worth repeating, so I'm going to say it again. Apocalyptic literature was never meant to be read purely literally. See, there's an entire segment of evangelical Christianity that traces its origins back to about the mid-1800s, which has insisted that the literal meaning of biblical texts is the only valid meaning, unless, of course, it's absolutely impossible to read it literally, such as when John the Baptist calls Jesus the Lamb of God. Well, clearly Jesus isn't a lamb, so that's symbolic. But everything else, go literal and only use non-literal interpretation when it's absolutely impossible to interpret literally. That's what this form of theology taught. This is an extremely ill-formed conclusion on the part of those who did not know that the nature of apocalyptic writing is primarily non-literal and highly symbolic. It would be like going to a political cartoon in a newspaper today and trying to read it literally. No, the political cartoon has symbolic meaning. It's telling truth. It's not false. It's not making stuff up. Well, depending on the cartoon, yeah, it might be. But you get my point. It's not intending to make up mythology. A political cartoon is making a statement about the real world, a very real statement, but it uses images and symbols and caricatures and exaggerations and animals and creatures and all kinds of stuff. So if you open a newspaper today and you see a drawing of a donkey kicking an elephant between the legs while the elephant's trunk is wrapped around the donkey's neck, choking him, well, you know that that's probably referring to the ongoing fighting using dirty tactics in Washington that happens between Republicans and Democrats in the American government. But guess what? A reader 2,000 years from now in another part of the world would probably not get that meaning. They could take that same cartoon and start thinking that Americans worshipped a donkey god and other Americans worshipped an elephant god, and sometimes these gods warred with each other, and whichever side won, the people would rejoice, and whichever side, whatever. You get my point. You can read all kind of crazy stuff into it. It becomes a Rorschach test for whatever you want to see in the image. Well, that's what happens if you don't know what the symbols are and what the images are. And it's the same thing with Revelation. But due to the popularity of many Christian teachers and pastors who hold to this method of interpretation, the literal reading of Revelation and other books like Daniel became the default approach among many evangelical Christians. To this day, there are various Bible colleges and even seminaries which accept, quote, only the literal interpretation of Revelation. And unfortunately, many otherwise solid Christian leaders and teachers have adopted and continue to perpetuate this wrong-headed approach. Apocalyptic literature uses certain well-known symbols and metaphors, often drawn from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, to convey ideas, traits, or circumstances in a vivid, visionary manner. It doesn't just, here are the facts, ma'am. No, the apocalyptic literature paints a picture using vivid, shocking, sometimes contradictory imagery to denote feelings. Revelation's been compared to things like a symphony or an impressionistic painting, mural, poetry, worship. It's a kaleidoscopic book packed with imagery that's meant to convey very real things, just not in a literal, straightforward manner. So when early Christians read Revelation about a dragon rising out of the sea, putting his foot on the shore, they weren't waiting for on a specific beach for this to happen. They knew this was a symbol of an evil or a beastly power or some threat that was approaching them, and that its ultimate source was the demonic realm of chaos or evil, which is what the sea symbolized in the apocalyptic mind. There's so much more detail and many more examples like this. Again, check the Revelation Guided Tour of the Apocalypse course at the link below this video if you want to go deeper in that. But just note, as you're reading the book, you're going to come across things like trees, trumpets, menorahs, or sometimes we call them lampstands, horns, various numbers, books or scrolls that are either sealed or unsealed, the sea or the abyss, cosmic bodies like the sun, moon, and stars, specific ancient nations that are named, Israel, Egypt, Babylon, jewels, precious stones, different metals. There'll be plagues and thunder, lightning, earthquakes. I mean, these are all images that come from the Hebrew Bible and from the writings and the world of the images in the first century. They had meaning to the people then. And that's what we have to determine before we start coming up with what we think they mean.
Welcome to another edition of Superhero Seminary. I am your Professor T'Challa. You may know me as the Black Panther. I'm King of Wakanda. But today I'm going to talk to you about something that has crept into many Christians' way of thinking and is not very biblical. You see, many Christians will teach that animals do not have souls. I do not know where they get this from. This is simply not true. The Bible does not teach us. In fact, it is contradicted in the very first book of the Bible. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, we read, and God said, let the water teem with living creatures. Now this word, living creatures, in Hebrew, it's nefesh chaya, living souls, souls of life. And then in verse 24, God says, let the land produce living creatures, nefesh chaya, according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind, and it was so. You see, this term nefesh chaya, it means the breath of life or the soul of life. Every time in the Bible you see the word soul, that is the word nefesh. And in the Greek Septuagint, when they were translating this from the Hebrew into the Greek, long before the days of Jesus, they translated nefesh chaya into Greek as sukon zon, living soul. So right from the very first book of the Bible, right in the very first chapter, we see God creating the creatures of the earth as living souls. I do not understand how this came about, where people believe that animals do not have souls. Somewhere along the way, some folk theology, well-meaning Christians picked it up, probably having to do with notions of salvation and getting souls to heaven, as if that is the only goal of the Christian life. But the idea that animals do not have souls is one that is just not found in the Bible. In fact, the book of Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 10, in Hebrew literally says, he is knowing, a righteous man, the soul of his livestock, but the mercies of the wicked are cruel. In English it reads, the righteous man cares for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. But the Hebrew is very clear. He is knowing, a righteous man, the soul, nefesh, the soul of his livestock, of his behema. So to care for your animal means to know its soul. Richard Bauckham, theologian, has said, we might say the righteous person is attentive to the needs, the feelings of their animal. This statement refers more rather than goodwill towards the animal. It portrays the farmer who has gotten to know the animal well enough to tell when it's needing rest or grasping for a drink. And so we see this notion that animals do not have souls is just one that is not found in the scriptures. But the biblical mandate for the Christian is very clear. Messiah Jesus inaugurated in part what all creation longs for in whole. which Romans 8 points us to. But in the meantime, we are called to live out this eschatological idea as much as we are able, by being salt and light in the world as peacemaker stewards of the King of Kings who is coming to restore all things. Even I am King of Wakanda, but I have a king, King Jesus, and he is coming to restore all things. That includes creation. So we've been given a creation mandate. It's not pagan, it's not anti-Christian to care for the environment, to care for the souls of animals, to speak out for those who cannot speak, as Proverbs 31:8 puts it. Animals cannot speak. We, as image bearers of God, are called to speak on their behalf. So let us do that. Let us speak out for those who can't speak. Let us care for the souls of our animals. Let us be stewards of this beautiful creation that God has given us. That is our biblical calling. This has been another edition of Superhero Seminary. We'll see you again in class in the future. So long, and Wakanda forever.
Hello, class. Welcome to Superhero Seminary. I'm Professor Murdoch. You may know me by a few other names, though. Daredevil, Devil of Hell's Kitchen, Matthew, Matt. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Devil names. How many of you have heard that the devil's name was once Lucifer? How many of you have heard that he was once the most beautiful of archangels and even the heavenly choir director, and that at some point in the primordial past, he led a rebellion against God and was cast down to earth, where he later appeared in Eden to tempt Eve as the serpent? How many of you can find that story in the Bible? Well, there's good reason for this. It's not in the Bible. Yep, all of what I just said comes from various bits and pieces of non-biblical Jewish and Christian folklore throughout the centuries that was ultimately popularized by Milton in the 1600s in Paradise Lost. But wait. Didn't Jesus refer to Satan and his fall in Luke 10? Well, indeed he did. But it wasn't in some primordial past. Read the text. It was in response to the gospel proclamation ministry of the 72 disciples he sent throughout Galilee. And on top of that, he was actually quoting from Isaiah 14, which we're going to look at now, because that's where the mix-up happened and where the notion of Lucifer as a name for Satan came from to begin with. Here's how Isaiah 14 reads in the NIV. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit. You see that first part? O morning star, son of the dawn? In Hebrew, it says Hallel, son of Shachar. Hallel means something like shining one, and Shachar means something like dawn. And we know from Ugaritic texts, like the myth of Shachar and Shalom, that these were the names of Canaanite deities as well, interestingly. Shachar was one of the sons of El. So this title had lofty mythical connotations, even in Isaiah's day. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, before the time of Jesus, the phrase was rendered Eosphoros, and Hallel or Eosphoros was used to refer to the brightest star in the morning, what we know of as the planet Venus. Centuries later, when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Latin, the term for Venus, which meant something like light bearer, was used. And what was that Latin term? You guessed it, Lucifer. So Satan's name was Lucifer or Eosphoros or Hallel before he was booted out of heaven. Well, not so fast. Allow this blind crime fighter / part-time Bible teacher to challenge you to look closely at the text. What does Isaiah say at the beginning of this poetic, prophetic passage? Look at verse 3. It's right there in black and white. Verse 3, on the day the Lord gives you relief from suffering and turmoil and cruel bondage, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has come to an end, how his fury has ended. See, this entire passage is talking about a pompous, self-aggrandizing, evil pagan king who fancied himself as divine. We know it's talking about a pagan king because, again, look at what Isaiah says right after the famous Lucifer section. Verse 16, those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? The man who made the world a desert? Who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home? This passage is a prophetic taunt against the king of Babylon, though which specific king is up for debate as he's never named, and likely intentionally given his penchant for self-glorification. Where did the idea that it's referring to a fallen angel named Lucifer come from? Well, in large part from later Latin-speaking Christians in the western part of the Roman Empire. For example, Origen seems to have missed the hyperbolic nature of Isaiah's song when he said, no human being is said to have, quote, fallen from heaven, or to have been Lucifer, or one who arose every morning. And Jerome linked this taunt against the king of Babylon with Ezekiel's taunt against the king of Tyre in Ezekiel 28 and Obadiah's taunt in Obadiah 4, and says, Lucifer fell, Lucifer who used to rise at dawn, and he who was raised in a paradise of delight had the well-earned sentence passed upon him. And he goes on to cite Obadiah 4. Other Western interpreters, such as Eusebius, Ambrose, and Augustine, followed this line of thinking. However, even Augustine recognized that Isaiah was speaking primarily of the Babylonian king. Look what he says. What is said in Isaiah and the other statements in that context that speak of the king of Babylon are, of course, to be understood of the devil. Well, are they, Augustine? See, Greek-speaking interpreters in the East, who weren't really influenced by the Latin translation, recognize this passage for what it is. John Chrysostom says, hear what the prophet says of a barbarian king when seized with this frenzy. I will exalt my throne above the stars of heaven, and I will be like unto the Most High. And Aphrahad, a Persian Christian in the 3rd century, says, now Nebuchadnezzar said, I will ascend to heaven and exalt my throne above the stars of God and sit in the lofty mountains that are in the borders of the north. Isaiah said concerning him, see, they knew that Isaiah was talking about the king of Babylon. Aphrahad just assumed it was Nebuchadnezzar, even though the text doesn't name it. So if Isaiah and Ezekiel and Obadiah were all talking about human empires or pagan kings, why do they use such seemingly supernatural or heavenly language? Well, as my dear colleague Mr. T shared in the last episode of Superhero Seminary, the prophets, including Jesus, frequently used hyperbole in order to emphasize a point and provide striking, memorable imagery. The people in Isaiah's day were quite familiar with various myths and legends of pagan gods seeking to usurp the power of a higher god and being cast down in humiliation. This is a universal story. Everybody's heard of examples like this in their literature and myths throughout the world. And they were also familiar with the daily rise of the bright morning star that appears first and seems to dominate the entire dawn until the actual sun appears and utterly overtakes it in brilliance till it's no longer visible at all. This is exactly what Isaiah is saying will be the fate of Babylon's king when the true king of the universe renders his righteous judgment. As Hebrew Bible scholar John Goldengate puts it, Babylonian and Canaanite stories spoke of a god who tried to take over the power of the highest god. And the poem here turns such stories into a parable of what the Babylonian king is doing in presuming to exercise godlike authority, force, and prestige, and that over the whole world. He will collapse as readily as does Venus, the morning star, when it falls each day from the height of the sky. This is likewise what Ezekiel is doing in his prophecy about the impending fall of Tyre, another self-aggrandizing, wealthy, opulent, worldly power, by sarcastically comparing the king of Tyre to an angelic, Edenic, priestly being who was given everything, but became corrupt through greed and exploitation of others and will soon be cast down and destroyed. You can read all about that in Ezekiel chapter 28. When it comes to Satan's origin, before his appearance in Eden through the serpent, the Bible's simply silent, so we should probably be as well. Well, why then does Jesus quote Isaiah when the disciples tell him about the authority they're having over the demons during their preaching throughout Galilee? In writing about Jesus' use of Isaiah, my friend and esteemed New Testament scholar Ben Witherington puts it this way. Israelites were, by and large, not a myth-making people. They borrowed material from ancient Near East mythology, but they demythologized it and applied it to human figures, like the king of Babylon. Jesus takes the same approach and applies it to an all-too-familiar city, Capernaum, which is castigated as being as bad as Sodom or Tyre. You can read about this in Luke chapter 10. Those who are receiving Jesus' message are experiencing the humiliating defeat not of a particular worldly tyrant, but rather the one who is behind all worldly tyrants. Satan, like the kings of Babylon and Tyre centuries before, is now on the receiving end of God's judgment, and his empire, like theirs, is crumbling before the disciples' eyes. Those who embrace this message are living in the age to come. Those, like the towns Jesus is rebuking, who reject it, are going the way of Babylon, Tyre, Sodom, Gomorrah. This is the message of the, quote, Lucifer passage, and Jesus is quoting from it. It's not telling us anything about Satan's origin, but it's telling us a lot about Satan's destiny. Heck, even a blind man can see this. I'm Professor Murdoch saying so long, keep studying, and I hope to see you again here at Superhero Seminary. Wink, wink. If you like these courses, do us a huge favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons. Check out the other sessions of Superhero Seminary at the links on your screen. And if you want to share this video with others on your social media feeds, that is most appreciated. If you really want to help us, Disciple Dojo is a full 501c3 nonprofit teaching and outreach ministry that relies on monthly donors to make all our content available absolutely free. We would love for you to consider partnering with us, even if it's just a few bucks a month. For more information on how you can, see the links in the description. Welcome to this edition of SuperheroSeminary. You may have heard the term the Lion of Judah at some point. It's a term that gets Christians fired up and in this warrior image of the returning Christ. It's a very powerful and it's a very dominant image. But where does it come from? You see, this term goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 49, when Jacob, or as he was known by then, Israel, is blessing his different children and speaking prophetic messages over their future. And in chapter 49, verse 9, he says, Judah is like a lion's whelp, or like a lion's cub. And this title was kicked around by the tribe of Judah for a while, until eventually a king rose from the tribe of Judah, the king named David. And he epitomized strength and might and majesty. And so therefore, the Lion of Judah came to be associated with the conquering messianic king from the line of David, from the tribe of Judah, from the descendants of Israel. And by the time we get to Revelation, which if you haven't already, go check out the other sessions of Superhero Seminary, where my colleagues talk about this very misunderstood book. By the time we get to Revelation, the phrase Lion of Judah has become a messianic title, the title for a warring, conquering king. And the book of Revelation picks up on this, but it does what the book of Revelation always does. It takes it and basically turns it on its head. You can see things as they truly are, rather than as the propaganda machine of the Roman Empire is constantly filling your head with. And in Revelation chapter 5, we come to a scene where John is in the very presence of God. He's around the throne room of the Almighty, which has just been laid out in chapter 4. In chapter 5, John says, Then I saw in the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne a scroll written on the front and back and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a powerful angel proclaiming in a loud voice, Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth, or even third earth, was able to open the scroll or look into it. So I began to weep bitterly because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look into it. Now we're going to pause here for just a second. We need to know what's going on. In the first century, when a famous emperor, general, king, or ruler had an edict, a plan, something he wanted to put into effect, he would write it on a scroll. The more important the message, the more it was sealed. So only someone who had the authority to put the plan into action was authorized legally to break the seal and open the scroll. So you would seal up a message, you would put your royal signet ring into the soft wax or clay, and you would send it by your messenger to your general or official or whoever was going to put the plan into effect, knowing that they and only they would be able to legally open the seal and read its contents. So John sees a heavenly scroll, and it's not just sealed with 1 seal, it is sealed with 7 seals, the number of completion or wholeness or fullness. This scroll is jam-packed with plans from the Almighty, the true Emperor, God himself. But John weeps because no one is authorized to open the scroll. No one can even look into it. Who will put God's plan for salvation, judgment, and restoration of the earth into effect? There's no one who's worthy, and so he weeps. But then, verse 5, we read this. One of the elders said to me, Stop weeping! Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. Thus he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. So this is great news. John hears, hey, there is someone worthy to put God's plan into effect. The Lion of Judah. So that's what he hears, and he fully expects, you would think, to turn and see a conquering, mighty warrior king riding in to save the day. But look what happens. Verse 6, Then I saw, standing in the middle of the throne and the 4 living creatures in the middle of the elders, something like a slaughtered lamb. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and 24 elders threw themselves to the ground before the Lamb. You see, John expects to see a conquering lion. When he turns, he sees the exact opposite. He sees a slaughtered lamb. If you've ever butchered an animal, you know it's not a neat process. So something that looks like a slaughtered lamb is basically a disgusting, humiliated, defeated, beaten down, cut up, butchered animal. In other words, this is the complete opposite of a lion. A mighty roaring lion, the opposite is a slaughtered lamb. But this lamb is different. It's not just any slaughtered lamb. This one has 7 eyes, 7 horns. And eyes were the symbol throughout the book of Revelation of knowledge, of omniscience. And horn is a symbol all throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New, of strength and of might and power. So this one who is a slaughtered lamb is also in some inexplicable way all-seeing and all-powerful. Verse 8 says, When he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders threw themselves to the ground before the Lamb. Each of them had a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they were singing a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals because you were slaughtered. Not because you conquered or slaughtered, but because you were slaughtered. And by your blood, not by their blood, by your blood, you ransomed for God persons from every tribe, language, people, and nation. You've appointed them as a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels in a circle around the throne, as well as the living creatures and the elders. Their number was 10,000 times 10,000, thousands times thousands, all of whom were singing in a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb, who was slaughtered to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and praise. And then I heard every creature in heaven, on earth, under the earth, in the sea, and all that is in them singing, to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be praise, honor, glory, and power forever and ever. And all four living creatures were saying, Amen, and the elders threw themselves to the ground and worshipped. It's a joyous celebration because the Lion of Judah has conquered. But in Revelation, this conquering comes in the exact opposite way that it would come in the ancient Roman world, where conquering came through victory in the blood of your enemies. You see, Jesus conquers through his blood, not the blood of his enemies. His blood is what ransoms. His blood is what redeems. And it's by being conquered that he shows his true nature. Interesting fact, Jesus is never referred to for the rest of the book of Revelation as the Lion. He will from now on only be referred to as the Lamb. So when Jesus comes riding back to conquer, to judge, to redeem, to restore, to raise the dead, he does so not as the Lion of Judah, but as the Lamb. This gives us a key insight into a core tenet of the gospel, which is that Jesus is the conquering king, but he conquers in a way that is totally upside down from what was expected by God's people throughout the centuries and what's expected by a world today that worships power and might and riches and prestige. The Lion of Judah is the Lamb of God. And just as it was back then, so today, people would rather follow a roaring lion than a slaughtered lamb. But Revelation presents us with the challenge. The slaughtered lamb is the lion. If we want to be on his side, we have to be ready to follow the lamb wherever he goes, even if that means being willing to lay down our lives just as he laid down his. This is a challenging message, class. This message is not popular in many corners of the church, where even God's people, they still long for a mighty Jesus who will come, who will clean house, who will turn over tables, who will set up his kingdom, usually his American kingdom, and who will reign on the earth. But Revelation tells us he's already doing that. And it doesn't look like what so many people think. That's why we need sight beyond sight. And that's exactly what we see in this passage of Revelation. I'm Professor Lion-O. We'll see you next time, class. Remember, keep calm and follow the Lamb. And if you enjoyed this video, check out our other Superhero Seminary editions by clicking the link on the screen. If you like these videos and want to help see us make more, consider subscribing, sharing them with others, and becoming a donor to Disciple Dojo so this ministry can continue. Welcome to another edition of Superhero Seminary. I'm Professor Baracus. Today we're going to look at a passage in the New Testament about my favorite word. I'll give you one guess what it is. That's right, you know, I pity the fool that don't get this one right. What are you, some millennial? You don't even know who I am. Now the problem is that there's a verse in the Bible that would seem to say that I'm on my way to hell. Let's look at it. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is giving his Sermon on the Mount, and he says the following. You have heard it said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. So this seems pretty cut and dry. If you call somebody a fool, you're going to hell. That's how I've heard it told. But here's the catch. In this same gospel, just a few chapters later, look what Jesus says. In Matthew 23:16, Jesus is now talking to the Pharisees and the leaders in Jerusalem. And he says this, woe to you, blind guides. You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple is bound by the oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? So here apparently Jesus is contradicting himself. In the first instance he said, you call somebody a fool, you're in danger of hellfire. And he used the Greek word more. That's where we get the word moron from in English. It also happens to sound like the Hebrew word for rebel, but it probably just means fool. And then in Matthew 23:17 he uses the plural of that same word, moroi. So Jesus says, fools to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the leaders of Jerusalem. What's going on? Is Jesus contradicting himself, class? Well, it's important when interpreting scripture to understand some things about how it was written. And in this case, as with many of the sayings of Jesus, it's important to understand today's word, hyperbole. That's right, hyperbole. Hyperbole is a rhetorical exaggeration, figure of speech often used by Jewish wisdom teachers to underline their point. The point of Jesus' hyperbolic illustrations is generally to grab the hearer's attention and force that hearer to take his point serious. We know that Jesus' Sermon on the Mount words run into trouble if you take them literally. Otherwise, you got people running around gouging out their eyes, cutting off their right hands. After all, that's what Jesus said to do if it causes you to sin. But Jesus was a Hebrew prophet, and Hebrew prophets used shocking imagery, and they used hyperbole and exaggeration to get the listener to think about their inner motives. And that's exactly what he's doing by warning people going around calling everybody fools or raka. By the way, raka just means empty head. It's roughly equivalent to fool. It's not better or worse. It's just an Aramaic word, and fool is a Greek word, but they mean roughly the same thing. So what Jesus is saying using this hyperbole in the Sermon on the Mount is he's not giving us an escalating scale from local courts to the judgment bar of God, but a declaration of the absolute will of God, who wills not only that persons not kill each other, but also that there be no hostility between human beings, according to New Testament scholar Eugene Boring. Or as R.T. France said, this is not an injunction merely to avoid certain abusive expressions, that'd just be another form of legalism, but to submit our thoughts about other people as well as the words they give rise to God's penetrating judgment. My man Craig Keener, he says, although condemning anger and insults, Jesus himself expressed grieved indignation and called people fools under appropriate circumstances, like in chapter 23, verse 17. But he goes on to warn, yet our own indignation is too easily excused as, quote, righteous. And even just anger must be expressed productively, never in a manner harmful to another person. Thus, when debating with those like the religious leaders in Jesus' day, we must speak responsibly for their correction and accept the personal consequence. When dealing with those closest to us, such as a spouse, we must be humble ourselves and seek the other person's best interest in love. So if you're going to call somebody a fool, 1, you better really mean it. 2, they better really deserve it. And 3, the goal of you saying it should be for their restoration and their correction and their edification. You don't want to leave them as fools. You want to help them change. But that's what Jesus is doing. He's getting to the heart. Jesus always pushes past the outer and the legalistic and the ways that we can find loopholes and say, well, I didn't really break this commandment. Jesus says, no, the Spirit of God can see into your heart. Look down in your heart, fool. What's in there? Is it honoring God? Or are you trying to play legal games with the Almighty? Because when you belittle somebody needlessly, you belittling not only them, not only yourself, but the God in which both of you are made. And by the way, the ancient translators of the New Testament recognized that Jesus wasn't speaking in an absolute, that he was using hyperbole, because some manuscripts introduce in Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus says if anyone is angry, they introduce the word eke, without reason. In other words, they knew that what Jesus was talking about was unreasonable anger, not righteous anger, because Jesus would go on to show righteous anger. So no, Jesus isn't saying if you call somebody a fool, you're going to hell. What he is saying is if you call somebody a fool, you better check your inner motives, because you're going to be in the danger of God's judgment. You're in the danger of not a human court only, but of Gehenna. That's the valley of Hinnom outside of Jerusalem. Back in the Old Testament times, some of Israel's evil kings used it to offer child sacrifices to the god Moloch. It became a place that was unclean, impure. It's where they dumped the trash from the city. There were fires always burning and maggots, worms that never died, dogs fighting over scraps of trash and corpses. It was a nasty place, a terrible, unclean place, the last place you want to go if you were a faithful Torah following Jew. And that's why by the time before Jesus, it became known as a metaphor or a symbol for the reality of being apart from God. It became a metaphor for hell itself. And that's how Jesus uses it. If what's inside you comes out and it looks like what's going on down in Gehenna, that's the very thing you're in danger of becoming. N.T. Wright put it this way. He says, if you let your anger turn into foul and abusive language, sooner or later you may find yourself in court. And if you're the sort of person who sneers at everybody and calls them names, the fire inside you may eventually become all that's left of you, as Gehenna, the smoldering garbage dump of ancient Jerusalem, may take you over completely. So what we have in this passage is not one other rule to add on to our legalistic Christian check-in-the-box list. No, what Jesus is doing is what he's been doing the whole Sermon on the Mount, saying look inside. It's not what goes into you that defiles, it's what comes out, and what comes out of your mouth is a reflection of what's on the inside. So examine your heart, because God examines every word. Jesus is calling us to introspection, to looking beyond the surface. Do we pass the test? I don't don't know. I called a lot of people fools. This passage makes me need to do some introspection. Why don't you join me in that? Let's continue to follow the one who's the truth with the capital T. There's been another edition of Superhero Seminary. Go see the other sessions and lectures in this series over on our YouTube page. Subscribe if you like it and want to see more. Take care, class, and we'll see you next time. Hello, class. I'm Professor Beastman. Welcome to another edition of... That's better. Welcome to another edition of Superhero Seminary. Today's topic is one that is near and dear to my heart. The Mark of the Beast. Yes, you see, the Mark of the Beast. This term has entered the English language through centuries of pop culture usage to the point where it no longer means to most people what it originally meant in the Bible. I'm referring to the enigmatic 666 in the book of Revelation, which my colleague, Dr. Strange, incidentally, is taught on here at Superhero Seminary. So go check out his video in the link description after class. It's really good. It'll give you a good intro to the book overall. Now, back to 666. Due to the aforementioned popular usage, when you say 666 or Mark of the Beast, most people immediately start thinking of tattoos, credit card chips, or biological implants that some new world order is going to make people get in the future when the world has gone to pieces, or possibly as a precursor to some apocalyptic nightmare scenario. But what does the Bible actually say about the Mark of the Beast? Well, you might be surprised to find out that 666 is only mentioned a single time in the entire Bible. Yep, one single passage in all of Scripture. And it happens to be found in the most symbolic book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Again, go see Dr. Strange's lecture after you finished watching this one. The passage in question, where 666 is found, is Revelation chapter 13, which is part of a longer story that spans Revelation chapters 12 through 14, and actually the whole of the book. But here's a quick summary. Now, for an even better summary, head over to Disciple Dojo's video page and check out the full course, Revelation, A Guided Tour of the Apocalypse. It's 100% free, and it walks chapter by chapter through this extraordinary book, going far more detail than we can cover in this one session. But back to 666. Now, in this section of Revelation, chapters 12 through 14, which is, again, an apocalyptic vision of the entire span of redemptive history throughout the ages, John the author sees a vision of the unholy trinity arising to oppress God's people. At the head of the pack is the dragon, who opposes and tries to kill the Messiah and his followers, who are depicted as the heavenly woman, her son, and her other children, respectively, in this section. The dragon cannot destroy the woman or her son, so he decides to wage war against her other children. He does this by enlisting his two henchmen, the sea beast and the land beast. For more on the sea beast imagery, see my colleague, Professor Aquaman's video, also in the link below, on the imagery of the sea in the Bible. Now, this first beast, this sea beast, is depicted as a counterfeit or mockery of the Messiah, even right down to his seeming death and resurrection in chapter 13, verse 3. And he wages war against the people of God, who are denoted by the term, those who dwell in heaven. And he exercises authority that people not following God, those who dwell upon the earth, have willfully given him, after they are enamored by his power, his charisma, and his seeming invincibility. This sea beast is worshipped, and people pledge their allegiance to him willfully and joyfully. He's like an antichrist, literally. After this, we meet the final member of the unholy trinity, the land beast. And he's the one who carries out the edicts of the sea beast and exercises authority on his behalf over the ones dwelling on the earth, that is, those not following the Lamb. Like the sea beast, the land beast also wows the world with his signs and wonders, including being able to, quote, call down fire from heaven, kind of like Elijah, even more like at Pentecost. This is not accidental, because just as the dragon is a mockery of God and the sea beast is a mockery of Messiah, the land beast is a mockery of the Holy Spirit. Now, what would the original readers of Revelation, the people to whom it was written, what would they picture when reading this apocalyptic depiction? Because when trying to interpret Revelation, as with any other book of the Bible, we must first discover what it meant to them before we start trying to declare what it means to us. Well, the first readers of Revelation were Christians in the Roman province of Asia Minor. That's modern-day Turkey. They lived after the relatively limited yet horrendous persecution of Christians in Rome under Nero. Side note, I know that some scholars scholars believe Revelation was written before Nero's reign of terror and written as a prophetic warning of his coming rule and the horrors of 70 AD in Jerusalem with the temple's destruction, and there's some merit to this view to be sure. But most scholars believe Revelation is written after the time of Nero, and Nero is used as something of a prototype or a future idolatrous evil ruler or rulers that is about to arise on the scene. That is, a coming Nero version 2.0, if you will. Just like we would call would-be despots who arise in our age a new Hitler, for example. So, back to Revelation and the original audience. These Christians had gotten only a small taste of persecution, some more than others, while some were living large and free of persecution because of their cultural assimilation. But John writes Revelation to let them know that things are about to get much worse, and soon. And it's within this context that the story of the unholy Trinity is presented. For the first readers, the dragon would have immediately been associated with Satan, and chapter 20 verse 2 will make this explicit. The sea beast is depicted in a way that identifies it as something like the culmination of the monsters in Daniel's vision, which represented the world empires that would arise to persecute God's people. And so it's no surprise that the sea beast bears a striking resemblance to the Roman emperor, and one in particular, which we'll get to in just a minute. The land beast, in turn, signifies the local authorities that demanded worship of the emperor and of Rome. That is, the imperial cult that arose in Asia Minor from the land, as opposed to being brought in from Rome via the sea. You see, Roman citizens in Asia Minor were constantly trying to prove their loyalty to Rome for both practical and ideological reasons, and to demonstrate their sense of true patriotism. They built temples dedicated to the emperor and encouraged their citizens to worship him and offer sacrifices or incense to his image. In fact, if you didn't participate in this emperor worship, the local authorities and the heads of the various trade guilds would blacklist you so that you were unable to participate in the local economy. You wouldn't be able to buy or sell in the market if you didn't first offer a pinch of incense to the emperor and acknowledge him as, quote, Lord and Savior. You had to demonstrate your Roman nationalism in order to be considered a good, patriotic citizen of Rome in good standing. Now, for more on the difference between good patriotism and evil nationalism, see my colleague Captain America's video, also here in Superhero Seminary. Now, it's within this cultural context that we at last come to the infamous 666 passage. Here's what we read. John says, "Then I saw another beast coming up from the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but was speaking like a dragon. He exercised all the ruling authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and those who inhabit it worship the first beast, the one whose death wound had been healed. He performed momentous signs, even making fire come down from heaven in front of people. And by the signs he was permitted to perform on behalf of the beast, he deceived those who live on the earth. He told those who live on the earth to make an image to the beast who had been wounded by the sword but still lived. The second beast was empowered to give life to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak, and could cause all those who did not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He also caused everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to obtain a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Thus no one was allowed to buy or sell things unless he bore the mark of the beast, that is, his name or his number. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the beast's number, for it's a man's number, and his number is 666. Now, it's crucial to recognize that John's original readers were invited to calculate the land beast's number, and that it was man's number. So whatever we think 666 means, it must be something that would have been understandable to the original readers. Interestingly, in some manuscripts of the book of Revelation, the number is written as 616 rather than 666. And we'll see in a minute just why this is significant. Now, how can someone have a number? What does this mean? And how can that person's number be calculated? To us, this is a strange and mysterious concept, but to Greek-speaking Roman citizens of Asia Minor, especially those from a Hebrew background, it was quite normal. This is because of the ancient practice of gematria, which was widespread throughout the Roman Empire. See, in gematria, each letter in the alphabet is assigned a numeric value. So, if we're using the Greek alphabet, alpha is 1, beta is 2, gamma is 3, and so on. Thus, by adding up the numeric values of the letters in a person's name, you would arrive at that person's number. In fact, an ancient piece of graffiti has been unearthed in Pompeii that literally says, "I love the woman whose number is 545. Now, it's easy to find a person's number if you know their name, but it's incredibly difficult to decipher a person's name from just their number, because many letter combinations can add up to the same number. But if you have a relatively good idea who the person in question may be, and you have the number, you can check to see if they match, and thus calculate who the number is referring to. So who might 666 be referring to? Well, given the numerous parallels in Revelation between the sea beast and the Emperor Nero, it should come as no surprise that the Hebrew name Neron Caesar, which is Nero Caesar, yields the gematria number, you guessed it, 666. And even more, remember that I said a few manuscripts have 616 instead of 666? Well, if you happen to take the alternate spelling of Nero's name in Hebrew, Nero Caesar, you get, 616. And on top of all this, the word beast in Greek itself yields the number 666. So for this reason, the early Christians who had lived through the persecutions and the blasphemous reign of Nero are being told by John to get ready, because another beastly Roman power is about to arise and wage war against the followers of the Lamb. And part of his means of oppression will be economic. But granted that the sea beast is identified as Nero, and the land beast is the imperial cult that will oppress those who don't worship him, what exactly is the mark that people will receive? Again, remember that all of this is an unholy mockery of God and his ways. And remember that earlier in the book of Revelation, before God unleashes judgment in one of the book's judgment cycles, he first tells his angels to put a mark on those who truly follow him, to distinguish them from those who do not. This mark is the seal of the Lamb, and it's placed on the foreheads of those who follow him. And this imagery, in turn, comes from the Hebrew Bible, from the book of Ezekiel to be more precise. In Ezekiel chapter 9, God is depicting as putting a seal on the foreheads of those who are genuinely following him before the rest of Jerusalem is destroyed. The thing to remember is that God's seal on the forehead is not an actual mark, tattoo, barcode, or credit card chip. It's a spiritual identifier that God himself sees and accepts. It denotes people who are living lives of commitment to him rather than worshiping false gods in both Ezekiel and Revelation. So, if God's mark is not a physical object, why should we expect that its satanic counterfeit will be some kind of physical mark or tattoo or barcode or credit card chip? Most likely, the mark of the beast is the spiritual indicator upon those who follow and worship the beast rather than the Lamb. It's on their foreheads, what they think about, as well as on their hand, what they actually do. To the original reader, this would have brought to mind things like participation in the imperial cult. If you did not worship Caesar, forehead, and offered sacrifices or incense to him as Lord and Savior, with your hand, you would not be allowed to participate in the market or trade guilds that were all dedicated to him. You wouldn't be able to buy or sell unless you worship King 666 or 616. Now, this has profound meaning for the original Christians to whom Revelation was written, those in Asia Minor who were about to endure persecution and exclusion on account of their belief that Jesus, the Lamb, was king, not Caesar the beast. But this was treason in the eyes of good nationalistic Roman citizens, yet it was the essence of the gospel proclamation from day one. So Revelation presents early Christians with a choice: worship the powers of this world in the form of Rome at the time, or any subsequent empire or leader that sets itself up in the place of God's people in the future, or follow the Lamb who was slain, even if it means being willing to be slain just as he was. This is a powerful call to faithfulness in the face of persecution or complacency with the powers of this world. It's a death blow to the idol of nationalism, but it is the truth from heaven's perspective. So let us not be preoccupied today with dizzying timelines, complex calculations, end times charts, or false prophets warning us to be on the lookout for specific future leaders who will literally put marks on people's bodies. Satan is much more crafty than that. He's been leading people astray for a long time and hasn't needed barcodes or credit card chips in order to mark out who are his. Instead, let us beware of any world power, institution, leader, or mindset that sets itself up to be worshipped. Let us seek to follow the Lamb rather than mimicking the ways of the beast, because every generation faces such a choice, and it is far more subtle and insidious than what you let someone tattoo or inject onto your skin. You can be tattoo-free and still bear the mark of the beast. I'm Professor Beastman from Superhero Seminary saying farewell and follow the Lamb.
Welcome back to Superhero Seminary class. Once again, I'm Professor Jarin, and this is my colleague, Dr. Grogu. You know, I never expected to be a parent. It was kind of forced upon me, to be honest. And since then, I've learned that parenting can be really challenging. The child's always getting into things they're not supposed to, pushing boundaries, and learning how to make their way in this dangerous galaxy of ours. Even with the most nurturing, they can still find themselves in trouble with the authorities from time to time. And that's why there's a whole book in the Bible focused on helping train children, including us adult children. I'm talking about the book of Proverbs, of course. And today we're going to look at perhaps the best-known proverb of them all, Proverbs 22:6. Now, in most translations, it reads something like, Train up a child in the way he should go, and even if he grows old, he will not depart from it. Or something like that. And it seems straightforward, right? Train the child in the way, and he'll never turn from it when he grows up. Except for two important things. One, Proverbs are not promises. And two, that's not actually what this passage even says. First of all, even if the traditional reading is correct, it's important to keep in mind that Proverbs are not promises. They're, well, Proverbs. They're like ancient nuggies of wisdom, created to be contemplated, meditated on, and intended to take an all things being equal, this is what we should expect in the world approach, not ironclad promises or prophecies. And we know this because many of the things declared to be true in the Proverbs are exactly what the psalmist and the prophets cry out to God about when they look around at their broken, sinful surroundings. If Proverbs were always true, then the prophets and the psalmists could have saved a lot of ink and a lot of time. So that's a crucial point to always remember. Proverbs aren't promises, and we can't interpret them as such. Now, in the case of Proverbs 22:6, what many readers who aren't able to read it in the original Hebrew might be surprised to learn is that the proverb itself is actually an ironic warning rather than a warm, fuzzy promise. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the actual proverb in Hebrew that I swiped from a Disciple Dojo video course. A course that I strongly encourage you to follow this video up with, class. Seriously, go take that course if you haven't already. It's even better than what you find here at Superhero Seminary. Now, as you can see, Proverbs 22:6 literally reads, Chanok lana'ar al pi darko, gam ki yazkin lo yasur mamena, or train up, or dedicate. It's the same word, train up and dedicate. It's the word from which we get the word Hanukkah from. For a youth, on the mouth of, and that's a Hebrew idiom that means according to. So, train up or dedicate a youth according to his way. Even if he grows old, he will not turn from it. Now notice that there's simply no should anywhere in the text when talking about the way to train up the child. Should is an entirely interpretive decision that was made on the part of the translators who took the his in his way, darko, as referring to God. So his way equals God's way equals the way the child should be trained up in. That's how they got there. Now, this may be theoretically grammatically possible, but it is highly contextually unlikely. A much more natural and likely reading is that the term his way is referring to the child's way, not God's way. God is nowhere mentioned in the proverb after all. The only he who is mentioned is the na'ar, the youth, the young man, the child, in the first line. That's whose way is being suggested. Now, if you have an NASB translation, take a look at the footnote on this passage, and you'll see the correct reading. And for some reason, when the Septuagint was being translated, this verse is completely omitted. So there's a bit of mystery surrounding this interpretation, to say the least. But what does training up a child in his way mean then? And why would the proverb command it? Well, remember, proverbs are like little word puzzles, sayings meant to be pondered and mulled over by the audience. They can contain sarcasm, irony, playfulness, or nuances that are intended to be explored and unpacked by those who are seeking wisdom. That's what wisdom literature does. So sometimes a proverb will give an ironic or sarcastic command to do something in order to emphasize vividly the folly of doing that very thing. Here's an example. Look at Proverbs 19:27. It says, literally, cease, my son, to listen to discipline in order to stray from words of knowledge. This is an ironic command, similar to how I might tell a perp, keep running and I'll have to bring you in cold. It's a warning given in hopes that it will not be literally heeded, but rather will convince the person that they should do the opposite if they want a better outcome. My colleague Dr. Gordon Hugenberger suggests that earlier translators likely misunderstood this as a simple imperative command, and that's what led them to interject the should concept into this passage. I think he's right. If you don't believe me, go read his essay on this passage in Basics of Biblical Hebrew, pages 284 and 285. And keep in mind, this is one of the most widely used introductory Hebrew grammars in the world. Not some obscure blog post or secret knowledge claim. It's right there for anyone learning basic biblical Hebrew. I think Hugenberger is absolutely right. I think Proverbs 22:6 is a warning, not a promise. It's a warning against training up a child in his way, that is, spoiling him, letting him do whatever he wants, and have his way in life. While that may feel good in the moment, especially to a parent who's tired and weary from correcting and disciplining their children, and who just wants some peace in the house for a change, or who wants to be seen as the cool parent that all their kids' friends love hanging out with, who considers their kid their best friend, and make no mistake, the proverb writer is saying if you want a spoiled adult, then by all means go ahead and spoil your child, because without an act of God, Spoiled, self-centered kids grow up to become insufferable, socially inept adults, and sometimes worse. This not only makes better grammatical sense, it also fits squarely in line with the overall thrust of the book regarding the need for training and discipline in order to raise children into responsible and flourishing adults. Look at Proverbs 19:18. It says, "Discipline your son while there is still hope. Do not set your heart on his destruction." Or Proverbs 29:17. "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart." These and so many other proverbs are emphasizing the need for parents to discipline, to take active roles in their children's lives, to form and shape, not heavy-handedly, certainly not abusively, but through loving, patient, understanding, godly discipline that every child needs. And if you don't think children need discipline, work in a nursery or an elementary school for 5 minutes and then come talk to me. And there's another reason that we need to abandon the traditional understanding of this proverb. There are many parents, including some in the pages of Scripture, who were godly parents and did train up their children in the way. And yet the child eventually grew up and left the faith. Countless faithful parents have been absolutely tormented by this Bible promise when their kids, who they poured into as best as anyone could, left the faith, got involved in all manner of wretched scum and villainy, and died without ever having made a prodigal son turnaround in their lives. For those parents, the traditional understanding of this verse hits like a blaster to the heart without any armor. We could have done more. We weren't godly parents. It's our fault. We're to blame. And instead of the biblical wisdom intended by the sage, they hear only condemnation and blame for not having trained up their child in the way he should go. So pastors, stop preaching this verse as a promise. Parents, I know it's a heartwarming thing to have embroidered over their crib or shared on Instagram alongside pictures of you doing awesome parent stuff with them, but it's not a promise of anything. What Proverbs 22:6 is actually saying is basically, if you want to end up with a terrible kid you unleashed into the galaxy, this is the way. Speaking of training up a child, it's time to get Dr. Grogu here to lightsaber class over in the gymnasium. If he had his way, he'd just play with his silver ball and nap all day. He's not going to end up a rampaging, emotionally destroyed Sith Lord on this Mandalorian's watch. Come on, Dr. Grogu. We can stop for cookies and blue milk when you're done. How does that sound? Class dismissed. If you enjoyed this session, be sure to check out the other episodes of Superhero Seminary here on the Disciple Dojo YouTube channel. We're a non-profit teaching ministry dedicated to training up people in their understanding of the Bible and discipleship, to equip, engage, and empower. This is our way. If you'd like to support this ministry, please like and share our videos. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. You can also partner with us as a monthly dojo donor at any amount of galactic credits a month you can afford, though dollars are even better. You can do that at the link at the top of the screen right now. Thanks again for watching, class, and we'll see you next time here at Superhero Seminary. Alright, settle down, class. I'm Professor Jarin. Welcome to Superhero Seminary. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're not a superhero. You're a bounty hunter with fancy clothes and gadgets. Well, I am a bounty hunter, which puts me in good company, as we're about to see. But as for not being a superhero, my little colleague here would beg to differ. And since he has superpowers... No, Grogu, not now. These are friends. They didn't mean anything by it. That was close. Any more interruptions from you guys, and I'm going to let him do the magic hand thing. As I was saying, I am a bounty hunter, and I follow the way of the Mandalore. As you all know, this is the way. But I want to tell you about another bounty hunter, in another way. His name was Saul, and he was from the city of Tarsus. Like us in the Watch, he was devout, considered to be a zealous extremist by many. And like me, he was good at tracking people down and bringing them in, warm or cold. But instead of choosing to follow the way, he sought to stamp it out entirely. You see, this guy was on a Sith-like quest to rid the world of these heretics. After all, he believed, they followed a phantom, and thus were a menace. See what I did there? Anyway, Saul was headed to the ancient city of Damascus, where some of those who followed the way were said to live. But on the road there, he had an encounter with the light. After this encounter, Saul was a changed man. He threw off his old identity and put on the armor of God. No beskar needed. From that moment on, Saul of Tarsus, a known persecutor of the way, became the most famous herald of the way. He traveled the world announcing the good news, or gospel in his native Greek language, that there was a new emperor, No, not that one. A true emperor. Now, of course, since he was formerly well known among the Temple Guild and had essentially turned his back on them, he was not always welcomed by those loyal to the guild who did not follow the way. Nevertheless, despite constant opposition, word continued to spread throughout the empire. Eventually, the Temple Guild had him arrested and imprisoned on one of his visits back to his adopted city of Jerusalem, the very place where he himself had overseen the death of a man named Stephen, who was an original follower of the way. When he was brought before the empire's troopers, he summarized everything that had happened to him and how he came to follow the way. When the troopers learned of his former standing and that he actually was still a legal citizen of the empire, they got spooked. They were worried that some of the more zealous among his enemies would somehow have him killed while he was under their watch. And there was a plot involving like 40 of them. His nephew had learned of it and warned the troop commander about it. So he was secreted away to a city called Caesarea, or as we might call it, Emperorville. While he was there, he was taken to Ma Felix, and again had a chance to tell everyone about how he came to walk in the way. Ma Felix found him intriguing and was not entirely unsympathetic, but like all Moffs, Felix was motivated more by greed and a lust for power and influence than by such things as righteousness, self-control, or coming judgment. Eventually, Ma Festus succeeded Ma Felix, and after yet another recounting of his saga in the presence of a local imperial puppet king named Agrippa who had come to honor Ma Festus, he was almost released from imprisonment. But since he had earlier requested to appeal his case all the way to the emperor rather than be sent back to Jerusalem to be tried by the corrupt Temple Guild, he was put on a boat with other imperial prisoners and shipped off in chains to Rome. Along the way, some crazy things happened. Storms, shipwrecks, even an incident with fire and snakes where he was mistaken for a god. But finally, he was delivered to Rome, where eventually he was beheaded. What, were you expecting a happy ending? You know some of the best stories don't always have those, right? But here's the point, class. Until the very end, Saul of Tarsus walked in the way. He was a faithful retainer of the galaxy's true emperor. Violence, hatred, fanaticism, and weapons had once been a part of his religion, but when he encountered the way, everything changed. What was it about this Jesus figure that, even after his public and humiliating execution by the empire, could turn a hardened fanatic terrorist like Saul of Tarsus into one of his most famous Padawans? Someone who willingly surrendered his life to the imperial executioner's dark saber, all for the sake of being able to tell others, even those in the heart of the empire, about the way. Well, that's what I leave you to study and consider, class. We all must choose the path we walk. Many paths lead to destruction. Many paths claim to lead to the light. But there's only one person in history who ever claimed to be the light, the truth, the way. Which way will you walk in, class? Okay, time for lunch. I hear they're serving frog legs, caviar, and nuggies in the cafeteria today. And if they run out before we get there, I'm in big trouble with this guy. Class dismissed. If you enjoyed this session of Superhero Seminary, be sure to check out the other episodes here on Disciple Dojo YouTube channel. And if you like them, go ahead and click like and subscribe. That would really help us out.
Hello class, I'm Dr. Diana. Welcome to another edition of Superhero Seminary. You know, when I was a little girl growing up on Themyscira, I was always taught to be strong, brave, mighty, smart, and capable. That's just how it was for us Amazons, and we never knew any different. But sadly, this is far from the norm in many societies around the world for women, including many that claim to base their worldviews on the teachings of the Bible. And this is so strange because the Bible, of all things, contains numerous accounts of women who are all of these things. Now, we don't have time to talk about Wonder Women like Deborah, Jael, Ruth, Huldah, Priscilla, Mary, or Phoebe today. But their stories are there for anyone to read for themselves, and ladies, I suggest that you do. Instead, in today's session, I want to go all the way back, to the beginning in fact, and clear up a misunderstanding that has gone on for far too long. I want to talk about what woman was created by God to be, because not many people know this, even in churches. After the big picture summary of all creation found in Genesis 1, we narrow in on the particulars of humanity's creation in Genesis 2, where God creates the human, and in Hebrew the word is Adam, and later becomes the word for man or mortal, and places him in a special garden, from whence he shall steward God's creation, and begin to multiply over the face of the earth, ruling as God's image-bearing vice-regent. But there's just one problem. One thing about the situation that is not good. We read in Genesis 2:18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." So Adam needs help. And this is where the misunderstanding occurs among Bible readers. In reading through many English translations, one could easily assume that what it says Adam needs is a maid, a good helper, or helpmate, or helpmeet, an assistant, a second fiddle, behind-the-scenes companion who can take care of things, including his loneliness. So Adam can go about the business of ruling the world as God's image-bearing king. That's what English terms like helper usually conjure in people's minds. The helper isn't the primary lead. They're the background cast. I mean, we all know you can enjoy a hamburger just fine without hamburger helper, right? But Genesis wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, the term used here for helper, ladies, is ezer, like laser without the L. Ezer, and the verb it comes from, has the basic meaning of to help, assist, come to help. But it is almost always used to describe military help or deliverance. Here, let's look at some of the other Ezer appearances in the Hebrew Bible and see what it communicates. And we'll use the ESV since it's popular among conservative and complementarian Christians. In Joshua 1:14, "Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them." 1 Kings 20:16. "And they went out at noon, while Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the booths, he and the 32 kings who helped him." 2 Chronicles 28:16. "At that time King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help." You see, to be a helper in the ancient Hebrew world was to be an ally who comes to fight alongside someone. Look at this event in David's life that illustrates the concept clearly. 1 Chronicles 12:1. "Now these are the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he could not move about freely because of Saul the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. David went out to meet them and said to them, 'If you have come to me in friendship to help me, my heart will be joined to you. But if to betray me to my adversaries, although there is no wrong in my hands, then may the God of our father see and rebuke you.' Then the Spirit clothed Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, 'We are yours, O David, and with you, O son of Jesse. Peace, peace to you, and peace to your helpers, for God helps you.' Then David received them and made them officers of his troops. They helped David against the band of raiders, for they were all mighty men of valor and were commanders in the army. From day to day men came to David to help him, until there was a great army like an army of God." Being an Ezer in the ancient world was not merely being a helpmate. It was a mighty and honorific military title, so honorific in fact, that it is most often used to describe God himself and what he does for his people. Isaiah 41:13-14, "For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say, you fear not. I am the one who helps you. Fear not, you worm Jacob, you men of Israel. I am the one who helps you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel." Hosea 13:9, "He destroys you, O Israel, for you are against me, against your helper." God was Israel's Ezer in battle, and this concept was also used by the psalmist as a metaphor for God's general deliverance of his people from danger, threat, pain, or destitution. Psalm 54:4, "Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life." Psalm 75, "But I am poor and needy. Hasten to me, O God, you are my help and my deliverer. O Lord, do not delay." Psalm 115:9-11, "O Israel, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. O house of Aaron, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. You who fear the Lord, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield." Psalm 118:7, "The Lord is on my side as my helper. I shall look in triumph on those who hate me." Again, to be an Ezer is anything but secondary or of lesser worth. In her book, The Gospel of Ruth, my fellow Wonder Woman, Carolyn Custis James, points out the meaning of this glorious term beautifully. A powerful Hebrew military word that is used most often in the Bible to describe God as Israel's helper. God employs the term twice when he creates the woman. The Bible's consistent usage of Ezer within a military context has led to the conclusion that God created the woman to be a warrior alongside the man in advancing God's kingdom throughout the earth. This is every woman's calling, regardless of her age, marital status, or circumstances. Every woman is an Ezer from birth to death, and we are warriors for God's purposes alongside our brothers in Christ. Amen, Carolyn! She gets it, so you ladies, and you fellas out there, we are women created to be Ezers, deliverers, who come to the aid of those in need of help. Helper does not mean only being gentle, dainty, docile, subservient, or in the background. No, we were created to be Wonder Women. You don't have to be as beautiful as Aphrodite, wise as Athena, stronger than Hercules, swifter than Mercury, to be an Ezer. It is who you are as a daughter of the Most High and bearer of His image. We are called to be Ezer warriors, alongside men in whatever battlefields of life we are thrust onto. Women are not helpmates or helpmeets to men any more than God Almighty is a helpmate or helpmeet to Israel. Yahweh is certainly not a background assistant. He was not just standing there taking orders, doing less important things so people of Israel could get on to what was really important. That's not what it means to be an Ezer. So don't sell yourself short, ladies. Don't let anyone quench the fire in your hearts for world-changing, life-saving, eternally significant glory for which you were created to participate in alongside the men. God's image is both male and female together. He needs all the soldiers we can get in the spiritual battle against the serpent's forces. So chins up, ladies. You are fearfully and wonderfully made to be Wonder Women. And fellas, don't impose your unbiblical notions of what being a helper means on women seeking to live their calling alongside you. They need to know you see them as worthy allies, and you need them as your Ezer. Okay, class, that's all for today. I'm Dr. Diana saying farewell from Superhero Seminary. And to all the Wonder Women out there, keep up the fight, because we need you. If you enjoyed this session, be sure to check out the other episodes of Superhero Seminary here on the Disciple Dojo YouTube channel. We are a nonprofit teaching ministry dedicated to helping, wink wink, equip, engage, and empower people in their understanding of the Bible and their life of following Jesus as His disciples. If you would like to support this ministry, please like and share our videos and subscribe to this channel. You can also partner with us as a monthly dojo donor, which is a huge form of help.
Hello, class. Welcome to another edition of Superhero Seminary. I'm your professor. You can call me Steve, or you can call me Professor Captain, but that's a bit awkward, so just go with Steve. I want to talk to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart. My superhero name, as you well know, is Captain America. So you would think that I'm all things American. And that brings us to the subject today that I want to talk about, which is nationalism and patriotism. You see, there's a very big difference between nationalism and patriotism. The former is an idolatrous sin. The latter is a virtue that is to be celebrated. And I want to look at that difference today because a lot of people are confused about what is nationalist and what is patriotic. And a lot of nationalists think they're just being patriots, not realizing that they've succumbed to an ideology that's totally at odds with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So buckle up and get ready, true believers. In his book, The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis talked about the difference between good patriotism and patriotism that leads into evil nationalism. He said, love of home, love of place we grew up in, or the places perhaps many which have been our homes, and of all the places fairly near these and fairly like them, love of old acquaintances, of familiar sights, sounds, and smells. Of course, patriotism of this kind is not in the least aggressive. It asks only to be let alone. It becomes militant only to protect what it loves. In any mind which has a pennyworth of imagination, it produces a good attitude towards foreigners. How can I love my home without coming to realize that other men, no less rightly, love theirs? This is good patriotism, according to Lewis. But Lewis noted that there's a deviant, evil form of patriotism, which he says is, quote, not a sentiment but a belief, a firm belief, even prosaic belief, that our own nation, in sober fact, has long been and still is markedly superior to all others. And he goes on to talk about this attitude, which is nationalism, that our country is not just one we love, but our country is superior to others, is better than others. And therefore, he goes on to reason, if our country's cause is the cause of God, wars must be wars of annihilation. A false transcendence is given to things which are very much of this world. And that's what nationalism is. It's a false transcendence. It's a giving of idolatrous allegiance to one's country, which is very much temporary. Countries come and go. Nationalities come and go. Borders shift and change. Citizenship shifts and changes. These things are all temporary. They have no place in the kingdom of God other than the patriotic view, which is simply love of the things one loves because of the goodness in them, without views of superiority over others. In a recent post in Christianity Today, flagship evangelical publication in America, editor Mark Galli made a comment about nationalism versus patriotism, and particularly Christian nationalism. He says, let us be clear. To believe that members of other religions are to be feared instead of loved, and yes, sensitively evangelized, that is a denial of the power of God. To believe that we should secure borders at the expense of welcoming the sojourner, that is immoral. To believe that America is a divinely chosen nation to be privileged at the expense of other nations, that is idolatry. And to the degree that any Christian subscribes to such beliefs, to that degree is the Christian call to repent and believe in the gospel. You see, a lot of Christians have equated my symbol, America, the country that I was created to serve and to protect and uphold during our darkest hours, with the kingdom of God. And the two are not the same. Roger Olson, in his article on the difference between patriotism and nationalism, he had this insight. Patriotism seeks to actualize the highest and the best ideals of one's country, which can sometimes look like disloyalty to nationalists. Nationalists tend to confuse country with government and reject as disloyal all criticism of either. However, criticism of the government can be patriotic. In fact, American patriotism should be constructively critical toward the government. Nationalism is patriotism on steroids. It's patriotism denigrated into jingoism and chauvinism. It's a near idolatry of country and often appears in mixing celebration of nation with worship of God. Patriotism is honest about the country's failures and urges leaders to push on towards better achievements of its founding ideal. Nationalism rejects all criticism of the country as almost, if not exactly, treason. Patriotism regards America as a gift from God and thanks God for it, but equates America with ideals such as freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and equal justice for all. It is realistic in knowing that government and society do not always live up to those ideals. When patriots wave the flag, they are fully aware that it symbolizes and represents wonderful ideals and not every decision and action government makes. When nationalists wave the flag, they are using it as an idol to sanctify whatever America does. Class, let's be clear. In the kingdom of God, there is no room for nationalism. While on earth, Jesus rejected Jewish nationalism. If you closely read the New Testament, you see that while Jesus was strongly loyal to and even the embodiment of the covenant Israel of God, he also knew that that is in no way linked to national boundaries or citizenship or even places of worship. Jesus had a conversation with a foreigner, a Samaritan woman. It takes place in John chapter 4, and in it, Jesus specifically pointed beyond her nationalist understanding and the nationalist debate going on at the time to something greater. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors, meaning the Samaritans, worshiped on this mountain. But you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. This was an ongoing rift between Samaritans who worshiped in Samaria and Jews who worshiped in Jerusalem. And so she was asking Jesus to take a side in this nationalist theological debate. Jesus' answer is shocking. Woman, Jesus replied. Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. You see, this woman had nationalist concerns and questions. Her question was specifically nationalist. Who's better? Whose side is God on? Jesus responds, God's bigger than your nationalist goals. Yes, salvation does come from the Jews, but Jesus never equates with any province or region or state or citizenship. He equates it with those who worship in spirit and in truth. The kingdom of God has no flags. I, Captain America, defend the American flag, but I defend it as a symbol of freedoms and a symbol of acceptance and of welcoming the foreigner, the oppressed, the needy, the widow, the things that are carved on the Statue of Liberty. Those are the things that when I raise this flag, I represent America at its best. That's patriotism, not nationalism, because when America goes against what is right, Captain America will be the first one there opposing it. Those of you that read Civil War, you remember that whole fiasco. No, in the kingdom, there's no place for nationalism, because God's kingdom brings together people of all nations, and that is the true allegiance. In the last book of the Bible, which my colleague, Professor Stephen Strange, explained, Dr. Stephen Strange, I know he's particular about that doctor part. Well, my colleague, Dr. Strange, talked some of the symbolism in Revelation. Well, there's a passage in Revelation that's the most anti-nationalist passage in all of Scripture, I'd suggest. And we're going to end with that. John has a vision, and God is letting loose all of this judgment on the earth. All of these things are happening. Seals are opening, and each seal that's opened in the scroll brings forth another aspect of God's plan, which looks on the surface to be terrible, but which we know Jesus is guiding and overseeing the process and protecting his people throughout, despite their physical persecution. In chapter 7, during all of this, John says, Then I heard another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea, Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. These are the servants of God. These are the ones who God is going to hold through the tribulation that they are enduring, the persecution that they are enduring, the ones who God has marked out as his special people. And this is a military census, a Hebrew military census, almost taken verbatim from the book of Numbers. That's what we are hearing, a military census. So this is what John hears when he hears, Let me put a seal on the servants of our God. But then, in the most anti-nationalist passage in all of Scripture, when John turns and looks at this army of Israel, at this 144,000 fighting men from the tribes of Israel, that's what military census lists were. That's what he expects to see when he turns to look. But what he actually sees, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And we find out in these chapters that these, what was depicted audibly as an end-time army of Israel, a very nationalistic image, when John looks, what he sees is the exact opposite. He sees that that is just the symbol of everyone from every tribe, every nation, every language who has come out of this persecution, tribulation, suffering because they followed the Lamb. You see, nationalism denies the sovereignty of the Lamb in order to bolster the aims of Caesar. Nationalism equates the kingdom of God with concerns for particular states or cultures or races or ethnic groups. Nationalism has no place in the kingdom. Jesus bears no flag. He bows to no Lord on this earth. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, can you celebrate your country? Absolutely. Can you be a patriot? Absolutely. But don't ever let that morph into nationalism. Every sin takes a virtue and twists twists it into a vice. Nationalism is the vice, twisted from the virtue of patriotism. So as your professor, and as the symbol of this country, let me be clear once and for all. Be American is not the same as to be a Christian. And the interests and the goals and the aims of the country of America are not always the interest, goals, and aims of the King of Kings and the kingdom of God. Let's keep the former at bay when necessary, and let's uphold the latter, because that's where our true citizenship and our true loyalties lay. So long for now. Be sure to subscribe and check out our other Superhero Seminary courses. Also note the links that will be in the description of this video so you can learn more about the difference between nationalism and patriotism, because all of this plays into our view of the world, our views of which countries we should stand with, which countries we should oppose, whose side is God on. All of these questions are bound up and get muddled when we refuse to see the difference between patriotism and nationalism, between the Lamb and between Caesar.
Hey there, class. It's your favorite blue-eyed Bible geek, Ben Grimm. Welcome to Superhero Seminary. Now, for you youngsters out there who didn't grow up reading my pulp-printed hijinks, it may come as a shock to learn, but I wasn't always this handsome. Back in my turbulent test pilot days, I took 3 of my friends for a quick joyride into space one day, except it turns out my big brain buddy Reed didn't account for these things called cosmic rays. As soon as we all landed, some weird stuff started happening. I'll let my friends spin you their yarn some other time, because I don't want to go stealing their thunder, but let's just say your boy Benji went up with baby smooth skin, but came home looking like a cement truck had an illicit affair with a bowl of orange sherbet. I mean, I was still Ben Grimm, just a hardened Ben Grimm. But I ain't complaining. If it weren't for this strong, stiff, and heavy skin of mine, my life would have been pretty dull these past 6 decades. But more than that, this whole experience has given me some insider knowledge when it comes to all things hardened. And that's what brings us to today's lesson, class. Anyone who's ever read the Bible has come across the story of Moses and the Exodus. You remember the story. Moses is hanging out with his daddy-in-law's sheep in the land of Midian, which is in modern-day Saudi Arabia, and he sees a bush on fire, except it's not being burned up. And my match-head buddy Johnny could tell you all about what that's like. Then he hears a voice talking to him, but ain't nobody there except the flaming bush. My girl Susie could tell you all about what that's like. So it turns out that this bush is in some way that I still can't fully wrap my fat orange head around, God. He tells Moses to go back to Egypt. Oh, yeah, Moses was officially on the lam for offing an Egyptian slave master who was beating on one of his people. That's important to remember. So God tells him, go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go or else. But then God says something that don't seem to make no sense. In Exodus 4:21 says, the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Wait, what? God is going to harden Pharaoh's heart so he won't be able to do the very thing God is commanding Moses to ask him to do? How is that fair? I mean, some people don't see no problem with this. They just say, well, God predetermines everything in advance. Who are we to question God? He's the potter, we're the clay, yada, yada, yada. He can make people do whatever he wants. He's God. But for others of us, this just don't seem right. In fact, it don't seem to jibe with all the other stuff we read in the Bible about God being loving and righteous and fair in judgment. If God was the one that made Pharaoh reject God, how can God then condemn and punish Pharaoh for rejecting God? It just don't make no sense. Why would God harden Pharaoh's heart and then act like Pharaoh is the bad guy for being hard-hearted? Well, kiddos, this is why it's important to look real close at this yarn and also at the Egyptian setting it's being spun from. When we do that, we see some stuff that makes a pretty big difference. Now, since I've only got 4 fingers, I'm going to make 4 fantastic points to help you kids better understand what's going on with this whole hard-hearted business. Point 1. Who exactly is doing the hardening? See, it's important to read the whole story rather than just looking at 1 or 2 verses here and there. When you do that, you see that while God predicted he would eventually harden Pharaoh's heart, this doesn't happen until long after Pharaoh has hardened his own heart. Most people miss that part, but take a look for yourself how the words are used, and you'll see that it's not until after the 5th plague that God is the one doing the hardening. All the times before that, Pharaoh hardens his own heart, or the text just says Pharaoh's heart became hard. In fact, in just the span of 3 verses, we read all 3 of these senses. Beginning in Exodus 9:34, it says, "But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned once more and hardened his heart, he and his officials. So the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his officials, in order that I may show these signs of mine among them.'" Now this is important because while God is sovereign over all things, he also chooses to work out his sovereignty through the freely chosen actions of his creatures, rather than creating little robots that do only what he has explicitly programmed them to do. That would make him no more than some cosmic version of Victor Von Doom. Now let me be clear. Whichever side of the Calvinist Arminian theological debate you land on will definitely color how you read the story of Pharaoh's hardened heart. But any reading that does away with either God's sovereignty over human history or humanity's free moral agency ain't worth a Yancey Street subway token. This brings us to point 2. What does hardening a heart actually mean? Well, there are 3 words that the Bible uses that get translated as hardened, and they make a big difference when we know what they meant to most of the readers back then. The first word is the verb kabod. The IVP Bible Background Commentary gives us a little insight on its use in an Egyptian context. This verb means to make heavy, and therefore is associated with very familiar Egyptian imagery. In the judgment scene from the Book of the Dead, the heart of the deceased is weighed in the balance against a feather, representing Ma'at, truth and justice, to determine whether the individual will be ushered into an afterlife of happiness or be devoured. So class, the ancient reader familiar with the culture of Egypt, which the Israelites definitely were after 400 years of slavery there, would pick up an ominous tune being played. Increasing the weight of Pharaoh's heart is a way of expressing that his afterlife doom is being sealed. The expression is most similar to the English cliche, driving another nail into his coffin. It represents simply accelerating the inevitable. Now, the second main verb used to describe hardening of the heart is chazak. It basically means to strengthen or solidify. It's similar to an Egyptian idiom that has a range of meanings, both good and bad, depending on how it's being used. The most interesting of these is found in the annals of Thutmose III, where someone who encourages the Egyptian army in battle is said to have made firm the heart of the troops. So calling someone strong of heart in Egypt would be something like how we say stout-hearted or possibly level-headed. It often describes someone, usually a leader, who was calm, confident, and able to face whatever challenges were set before him. So knowing that, we should be able to see the exceeding irony in the Exodus story whenever Pharaoh is said to have strengthened his heart. He may think that's exactly what a good leader should be doing in the face of some puny foreign tribal god who dares to step up to the almighty gods of Egypt. But what he sees as exceptional leadership is exactly the thing being exposed by Yahweh for the delusion that it is. Because when Yahweh starts to judge the gods of Egypt through those 10 plagues, it's clobbering time. Point 3. What does pottery have to teach us about hardening? Now, I said there were 3 words translated as hardened, and that brings us to the final one. This one is used only once in Exodus 7:3, but I think it may very well be the most insightful of them all. It's the word kashah. And when used in the Hithiel stem, as it is here, that's a Hebrew nerd term, don't worry about it if you don't know the language, it means to harden or make difficult. In fact, the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament tells us that when used of a human subject, it literally has the sense of pig-headedness. This leads some commentators and study Bibles, like the Biblical Theology Study Bible or the Jewish Study Bible, to use the term stiffen in this section, which is a really great way to think about it. Stiffening doesn't change it into something that it wasn't already, it just solidifies it in its particular state. Just like those cosmic rays didn't turn me into something entirely new, I'm still Aunt Petunia's favorite blue-eyed Benji boy with all my charm and personality. No, they just hardened what was there already. Granted, in a more cosmetic and literal sense than was the case with Pharaoh. Or take a more biblical example if comic book superpower origin story analogies aren't your thing. Think about pottery. When a potter is shaping the clay on the wheel, it's soft, pliable, workable. But when the pottery is finished being shaped, it's put into the kiln where it gets what? Hardened. Yeah, it doesn't go in a vase and come out a kettle. It doesn't change its basic shape. Whatever you put in the kiln comes out of the kiln. It just no longer has the ability to be remolded. It's no longer responsive. And that's exactly what God hardening Pharaoh's heart did. See, lest we forget, kids, this was a despot who literally was keeping an entire people enslaved and oppressed just to fatten his own empire. Not only that, but as a pharaoh in Egypt, he was literally worshipped as deity and ruler of all the earth. So don't go getting it twisted. Pharaoh was not an innocent pawn or a hapless sweetheart who God decided to turn into a monster just so he could publicly clobber him. No. This was a man who had spent his whole life hardening his heart in word and deed and the eyes of his people. So when we read about the final stages of Pharaoh's heart and God's hardening it, we're seeing, as Bruckner puts it in his commentary, Pharaoh's calcified will, encrusted stubbornness, and the rigor mortis of his reason. And all this is taking place as part of God's final judgment on Pharaoh for his lifetime of hard-heartedness. And that brings us to point 4. What does any of this matter to us today? Well, first of all, theologically speaking, we need to drop the idea that God made Pharaoh do something that Pharaoh had not already freely chosen to do time and time again. Even Augustine, the early church poster child of what would become later Reformed views on God's sovereignty, warns against such false deterministic interpretations. In his treatise on grace and free will, chapter 45, Augustine says, "This ought to be the fixed and immovable conviction of your heart, that there is no unrighteousness with God. Therefore, whenever you read in the scriptures of truth that men are led aside, or that their hearts are blunted and hardened by God, never doubt that some ill deserts of their own have first occurred, so that they justly suffer these things. Nor should you take away from Pharaoh his free will, for it does not by any means follow that Pharaoh did not, on his own account, harden his own heart. Thus it was that both God hardened him by his judgment and Pharaoh by his own free will." But how can we think about this whole free will sovereignty balance in the story of Pharaoh's heart in a way that helps us make sense of it? Well, since I used to be one of them fancy rocket ship pilots back in the day, and since I've been to space more than the average bear, I like to think of it like one of them black holes Stretch is always talking about. See, the gravity of a black hole will always pull things towards it, but it don't become inevitable unless you reach what them eggheads call the event horizon. The further away you stay from that line, the safer you are from getting sucked into oblivion. Now, you're free to choose to inch your way as close as you want to it, but at the point when you cross that horizon, you ain't got no more choice in the matter. Your fate's sealed and you ain't coming back, sweetheart. Likewise, Pharaoh lived his whole life circling closer and closer to an evil, greedy, maniacal, despotic black hole. And those plagues were enough to make even his advisors and many of his Egyptian subjects turn back and fear this finger of God that was pointing out the fate of the oppressor. But Pharaoh continued to double down and go full throttle. And once he crossed that horizon, judgment was inevitable. And God basically said, "So be it. You're not going to experience the full measure of your pig-headed commitment to arrogant evil." Pharaoh should have known better. The heart is crucial. Even in Egyptian theology, it was supposed to be guarded above all else. As the instruction of Ptah-hotep says, the life, prosperity, and health of a man is in his heart. And this basic universal truth is reflected in the famous Hebrew proverb, "Guard your heart above all else, for it's the source of life." Our heart is who we are at the deepest level, and our daily moment-by-moment decisions and habits are shaping our hearts whether we realize it or not. At some point, after consistently and repeatedly spurning God and doing evil to God's people, Pharaoh set the trajectory of his own heart into a downward plunge that passed the point of no return. At some point, God said, "Fine, have it your way." We don't know when that line was crossed for Pharaoh, but we should let it serve as a somber warning to us today as we reflect on how responsive, how pliable our heart is to the Spirit of God. In reflecting on this story, Alec Metyer put it beautifully. Humans are so created that the choices they make contribute to forming character, and character thus formed promotes the making of similar choices in the future. Choosing and habit forming are things we all know about. What none of us knows is when the point of no return will be reached. None of us can say, "One more sound choice and this good habit is permanently mine," nor can we say, "I can risk one more choice and still retain the freedom to give up this bad habit." Sadly, we can pass the point where freedom to change has been lost and still retain the illusion that I can give it up anytime I want. Thus, the situation in which Pharaoh found himself was not peculiar to him, but is intrinsic to the human condition. Only God foresees the decisive, freedom-destroying choice, and only He knows at once when that choice that kills freedom has been made. So, kiddos, when reading the story of Pharaoh and his hardened heart, I think it's helpful for us to ask ourselves today and every day, hey God, how's my heart doing? Is it pliable? Is it moldable and teachable? Or is it hardened? That's something only you and He can determine. That's all for today, class. I'm Professor Grimm saying so long from Superhero Seminary. And if you like this video, do us an ever-loving favor and tell your friends about us. We have lots of other sessions by distinguished faculty on a wide range of topics. So consider subscribing if you ain't already done so. Thanks for watching. So long.
All right, settle down, class. I know it's overwhelming being the presence of billionaire playboy superhero world saver. Go ahead, get a few pics. I don't mind. Use a good filter if you post it. None of that puppy dog ears nonsense. Let's sit in a dating app. Okay, that's enough. So, I'm your professor, Dr. Stark, call me Tony, and I am a creative genius. I build things. I construct technological wonders beyond human comprehension. Sometimes my creations even turn against me and I have to drop the hammer. Well, technically, he's the one who does that. But we're on the same team, so me hammer, Sue hammer. Anyway, the point is I'm very familiar with the wonders of creation and bringing new things into being. Sound familiar? If you've read Genesis, it should. Now, am I comparing myself to the Almighty? That's not for me to decide, of course. I'll let the press make that decision for themselves. But it does give me an ability to appreciate excellent craftsmanship when I see it. And I see it at a big picture level in Genesis chapter 1. Actually, it's chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 3. Whoever put chapters in the Bible blew it on the very first verse, but that's another story for another class, of course. So, back to Genesis. See, a lot of people try to read Genesis like a science book. And they end up reading all kinds of things into it that, well, just start there. But when I look at Genesis, I certainly don't see a science book. Boring. No, I see artistry. I see symmetry. I see creativity. I see beauty. Another subject that I'm quite familiar with. Wink, wink. Think about it. An omnipotent creator God wants to communicate with his finite, ancient, agricultural-based people, and he wants to tell them who they are, where they came from, and what their relationship to him is. And he wants to do it in such a way that it's not only comprehensible, but also distinguishes their ideas from the myriad other cultural origin stories floating around the caravan campfires and sacred shrines. He wants them to get a true understanding of themselves at a foundational worldview level, rather than a world picture level that requires 4,000 more years of scientific development. So what does he do? He paints a picture. A word picture, of course, but one that's artistically profound, philosophically true, imaginatively captivating, and can communicate to all people at all times across all cultures within all scientific paradigms. It's not poetry, but it's not straight prose either. It's something between the two. It gives the who and the why, not the how and the when. It's aspirational, as well as didactic. Okay, I'm getting a little too fancy. Let me just show you instead. Look, this is Genesis 1. Day 1, you've got day and night that are created. Day 2, water and the sky are created. Day 3, land and agricultural vegetation are created. Day 4, the sun, moon, and stars are installed. Day 5, you got swimming things and flying things that are brought forth. Day 6, animals and humanity arrive on the scene. Day 7, Sabbath rest. So like a divine craftsman, God creates and builds each day. Then there's evening, then there's morning. Then he continues with his work the following day. All of it building up to completion in 6 days, after which he steps back on a 7th day to rest and admire his very good creation. And as an inventor, I can tell you, it is very satisfying when you finish a project to sit back and marvel at how beautiful it is. But Genesis 1 is more than just a quaint comparison. It also presents an overall picture of what science has come to reveal as well, if we allow for literary artistry using phenomenological language. Sorry, I said I'd keep it simple. Language that describes how something appears normally, rather than with scientific precision. Now, think of our word sunset. We know the sun isn't actually setting or rising, but oh, Pepper, look at that gorgeous angle of light refracting through a revolving spherical body in relation to the star it's orbiting just doesn't generate the same level of romance. Likewise, using an artistic and imaginative language to describe the development of Earth's gradual formation from a dark, molten, chaotic clump of spinning debris to a translucent, watery abyss with a precipitation cycle, to plate tectonics bringing forth land masses upon which vegetation develops, to an atmosphere becoming transparent enough to see the heavenly bodies through for the first time, to the appearance of animal and insect life arising from the oceans, to the arrival of mammals on the scene leading up to the appearance of Homo sapiens. To do all that in a way that ancient Near East farmers and herdsmen can appreciate and pass on is pretty understandable and pretty genius. I mean, it's endured ever since. And honestly, what else should we expect? My colleague Derek Kidner summed it up with the stereotypical Cambridge eloquence this way: a God who made no concessions to our ways of seeing and speaking would communicate to us no meaning. Hence the phenomenological language of the chapter, like our talk of sunrise, dewfall, etc., and its geocentric standpoint. But hence also the heavy temporal foreshortening which turns ages into days. Both are instruments of truth, diagrams enabling us to construe, not misconstrue, a totality too big for us. It is only pedantry that would quarrel with terms that simplify in order to clarify. So when we're reading Genesis 1, let's not be pedantic, shall we? But wait, there's more. Not only is Genesis 1 literarily beautiful, it's also literarily efficient. And you know us engineers prize efficiency. Check it out. Look at this picture of all the creation days laid out in front of you. You notice anything? You see any pattern emerging? How about now? Yeah, it's right there staring us in the face. Days 1 through 3 set up the domains. Days 4 through 6 install the ones that will have dominion over those domains. In days 1 through 3, God fashions the realms. In days 4 through 6, God installs the rulers of those realms. And undergirding the whole process is a seventh-day Sabbath of rest and refreshing, something no other ancient people group celebrated in a world where you had to work every day to survive under the watch of capricious, disinterested, and arbitrary gods. That's why Jesus said the Sabbath was a gift. Honestly, class, we could spend an entire semester just on this section of Genesis. But today, I just wanted to show you a little glimpse of what makes it so fascinating and so enduring. No matter what age, culture, or level of scientific literacy it finds itself being read within. Some people may look at science and they see all the details it reveals, and then they look at Genesis and they see this framework, short, condensed, phenomenologically rich account, and they say, Tony, these don't look anything alike. One's got to be true, one's got to be false, or they both have to be false. Which is it? Class, let me show you two pictures. Look at this. Now, look at this. Now, which of these is a woman? Well, the answer, of course, is both. But this one has veins and arteries and muscles and labels, and this one, it just has skin. They don't look anything alike. How can they both be depicting a person? Of course, you know the answer is because they have different purposes. This one is meant to teach one thing. This one is meant to teach something else. This one is meant to teach scientific precision. This one is meant to inspire artistic appreciation. But they're both a person. So it's silly asking which of them is true and which of them is false. Well, likewise, when we look at Genesis and we look at science, we need to expect that they're saying the same thing, but they're speaking two very different languages. And if we start reading one through the lens of the other, well, that's when we start reading all kinds of things into one or both. So let's not do that. There's enough bad science out there as it is, and there's certainly enough bad theology out there as it is. So let's try to do the best of both, the best we can. Now, if you want to take a deeper dive into all this, head over to discipledojo.org and check out the free video seminar, The Bible and Science, Friends or Foes. It comes with a downloadable workbook, and the entire course is 100% free for any church, small group, ministry, or individual to do. No nickel and dime in here at Disciple Dojo, folks. Oh, I gotta run. Superhero, billionaire, playboy stuff, you know. That's it. See you later. Class dismissed.
Konnichiwa, class. I'm Professor Goku, and welcome to another session here at Superhero Seminary. You know, I gotta say, one of the absolute coolest things about being a Saiyan, Saiyan as you American kids say it, has got to be that I can fly. When I was little, I used to fly around on a cloud. Then as I got older, I learned how to do it on my own. No clouds needed. It's basically second nature to me at this point. It's pretty great, I'm not gonna lie. I know this makes a lot of you envious. You guys would love to be able to fly. And that's what I want to talk about today in class. Flying. Specifically the idea that someday all Christians in the world are gonna fly through the air to meet Jesus, who will be coming on a cloud to take them away to heaven before unleashing massive destruction on the earth. You may know of this as the rapture. I mean, even people who have never set foot in a church think the Bible teaches that at some point in the future, Jesus will make a partial return to earth to snatch believers away in a massive invisible worldwide disappearance, leaving behind empty cars, cribs, planes, and in case of rapture, this t-shirt will be unmanned shirts. But it may come as a surprise to many Christians and non-Christians alike that the Bible does not, in fact, teach any of this. Now, if you've seen Professor Thanos' lecture here, where he looks at the famous Left Behind passage, you know that Jesus was actually saying the exact opposite of what most people assume in that verse. But what about the even more famous rapture passage? That's where I want us to turn today, class. Now, Paul wrote this in response to questions that they had about church members who had recently died. These Thessalonian Christians wanted to know if those departed saints would somehow miss out when Jesus comes back. Now, before we look at the passage itself, I want to tell you about a couple of crucial concepts that the Thessalonians would have been pretty familiar with. The first one is the arrival of an important ruling official, otherwise known as a parousia. See, in the Greco-Roman world, when a person of great importance was coming to visit a town or city, in anticipation of his parousia, or his arrival, citizens would go out to meet him in a public and joyous celebration. This was a momentous event, and there's actually a specific term for it. It was known as an apantesis. Here's how the Pocket Lexicon to the Greek New Testament defines it: the act of meeting, or to meet, a phrase seemingly almost technical for the reception of a newly arrived official. Cicero wrote about the apantesis that he imagined Caesar to be receiving from adoring citizens all around the empire in 49 BC. Look what he says. Just imagine what apantesis he, Julius Caesar, is receiving from the towns. What honors are paid to him. The municipalities are showing the boy, Octavian, remarkable favor, wonderful apantesis and encouragement. We even see apantesis celebrations in the Bible. When the translators of the Septuagint were describing the arrival of the Ark of the Covenant to a town, they used this term. It's in 1 Samuel 6:13. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they looked up and saw the ark, they went with rejoicing to meet it, apantesis. And likewise, when believers got word that Paul and Luke were coming to their town in the book of Acts, we read, the believers from there, when they heard of us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. Even Jesus uses the word in his parables. But at midnight there was a shout, look, here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him. The early church father, John Chrysostom, who himself was a Greek speaker, writing not long after the time of the New Testament, describes the concept of an apantesis like this: for when a king drives into a city, those who are in honor go out to meet him, but the condemned await the judge within. The famous New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce summed it up this way: when a dignitary paid an official visit, a parousia, to a city in Hellenistic times, the action of the leading citizens going out to meet him and escort him back on the final stage of his journey was called the apantesis. So class, keep this in mind. When a ruler was coming to a city over which he reigned, crowds would go out to meet him in celebration in order to then follow along behind him in a procession back into the city. And this brings us to our second important piece of cultural context. When an apantesis was happening, it was a huge celebration, and people would often get caught up by the crowds and hurried along with them in the excitement. That's literally the verb that's used to describe getting swept up in the moment by others. Harpazo. Harpazo literally means to grab or seize suddenly so as to remove or gain control, to snatch or take away. But it's also used as a figure of speech to describe getting carried away by others for an important event or meeting. That's how Josephus regularly uses it to describe Claudius being ushered away by his soldiers, in fact. And in the New Testament, it's used with this same figurative meaning both by Jesus and Paul, who were in danger of being caught up by zealous crowds on different occasions. So, to sum up, when a victorious ruler arrived at a town or city, the loyal citizens would go out to meet him in a loud, public, joyous celebration in which people would be caught up in all the excitement. This was a known phenomenon throughout the Greco-Roman world, including Thessalonica. Are you with me so far, class? Now, with all that in mind, turn to 1 Thessalonians 4 and look how Paul answers the questions the believers there had about whether their fellow Christians who had died already would miss out on Jesus' return. He says, "Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who've fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words." Did you catch that, class? Paul is describing the ultimate apantesis. He's drawing on the well-known imagery of a royal arrival, but using it to describe not some puny earthly ruler coming from the north, south, east, or west on a measly chariot. Psh, no, he's talking about the King of Kings, who is seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven, coming back to claim his kingdom in fullness once and for all. But this passage is where the term rapture comes from. See, when the New Testament was translated into Latin, the word rapiemur which means to be snatched up, was used to translate harpazo. And that's where we get the English word rapture from. But does this being caught up refer to Christians literally being whisked away into the clouds in a massive disappearance act, leaving behind a confused world that will then go through 7 years of horrible tribulation until a final Antichrist figure emerges from somewhere in Europe, according to most versions of rapture theology, and attempts to destroy the city of Jerusalem in a massive Chinese, Russian, Iraqi, Iranian invasion, only to be stopped by Jesus' visible return to reign on the earth 1,000 years from a throne in Jerusalem? Whew, that's a lot to recount in a single paragraph. In short, no, class. That entire scenario was first put forth beginning sometime in the 1850s and evolving through various prophecy conferences and correspondence Bible courses put together by 19th and 20th century preachers and evangelists, and it was cemented into the fabric of American fundamentalism and later evangelicalism through the Scofield Reference Bible. Now, for much more on the historical development of this view of the end times, go ahead and check out the Apocalypse Now audio course available for free here on the Disciple Dojo podcast. Click the link at the top of your screen for more. Now, as exciting as that whole scenario is, it's important to realize most Christians throughout history and around the world have not held to such a view of this passage. Rather, they've recognized that Paul is talking about the final return of Jesus as conquering king to judge the quick and the dead, as the Apostles' Creed puts it. He's not talking about invisibly snatching Christians up to heaven for a few years until he really comes back. Paul's talking about the very visible and very final second coming of Jesus, what we call the resurrection of the dead. And he's doing so using the unmistakable vocabulary of Greco-Roman imperial rhetoric, which his Thessalonican readers would have easily recognized, but which we today are not quite as culturally familiar with, so we often misunderstand it to be talking about snatching people up literally into the clouds. And it's not just me saying this. Scholars from many denominations and theological traditions all recognize that what's going on in 1 Thessalonians 4 is nothing like what we see in so many presentations of the rapture in pop theology. For example, the New Bible Commentary on this passage says, "The picture is that of a group of citizens going out from a city to meet a visiting dignitary and accompanying him back. This implies that the Lord returns with his people to the earth." This language was probably never intended to be understood absolutely literally. It's describing things that go beyond words. The important thing is that believers, whether the dead or the living, are from then with the Lord forever. The Dictionary of Biblical Imagery says, in describing the second coming of Jesus, the picture of the faithful meeting the Lord in the air, in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, is drawn from the practice of coming out of a city to welcome a returning warrior who has been successful in battle. And in his commentary on 1 and 2 Thessalonians, New Testament scholar Ben Witherington says, "But it was also the case that a royal visit to a city would be announced by a herald, and might well also be announced by a trumpet blast meant to alert those in the city that the king was coming. This imagery is pursued further in verse 17 with the use of the term apantesin, to meet. This word refers then to the actions of the greeting committee as it goes forth from the city to escort the royal person or dignitary into the city for his official visit. Paul's Thessalonian audience may have missed some of the allusions to the Old Testament, but they would not have missed the language used here about a royal visit, indeed an imperial visit. They would remember the visit of Pompey, and later Octavian. N.T. Wright puts it this way: "So when Paul talks of Christians being snatched up among the clouds, he is again not thinking of a literal vertical ascent. The language here is from Daniel 7, where one like a son of man goes up on the clouds as he is vindicated by God after his suffering. A wonderful image, not least for people like the Thessalonians, who were suffering persecution and awaiting God's vindication. And their meeting with the Lord doesn't mean that they will be staying in midair with him. They are like Roman citizens in a colony, going out to meet the emperor when he pays them a state visit, and then accompanying him back to the city itself." And even scholars who don't believe that the Greco-Roman apantesis is a precise parallel to what Paul is describing admit that he is deliberately modifying its imagery for his own rhetorical purposes. We should admit that Paul deliberately reverses conventional expectations, which would actually fit what we know about his use of other conventions. Paul tends to modify existing language and cultural norms when communicating with his audience. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13-17, the custom of the Hellenistic formal reception is part of the cultural background for Paul's thinking. When he speaks of the coming of the heavenly king, he would probably have had in mind some aspects of the pomp associated with the great receptions he had witnessed or heard about. In Paul's mind, the coming of the monarch from heaven will far exceed the glory of the most magnificent reception ever lavished on a Greek or Roman king. And the late British pastor and theologian John R.W. Stott, who is widely considered the elder statesman of evangelicalism, sums up the message of this passage beautifully. "It is not clear how literally we are to understand being caught up in the clouds.
We know from Jesus himself that his coming will be personal, visible, and glorious. But we also know from him that it will not be local, there he is, here he is, but rather universal, like lightning which flashes and lights up the sky from one end to the other. Presumably, therefore, our going to meet him will also transcend space. And that's what this passage is about, class. It's not about people flying out of the air invisibly in some massive disappearing act. No, this passage is about the promise that not even death can separate the king from his loyal subjects. And what better image is there to use if you want to describe this glorious reception that we all will experience, dead or alive, when the king returns, not from some earthly battle, but from being seated at the right hand of the Father. This passage isn't about Christians being beamed up to heaven. This passage is about heaven coming to earth, which is what the Bible ends with a picture of in Revelation. So given the fact that neither Jesus nor Paul ever taught that Christians would be raptured out of the world before the final return of Christ, and given that the only proof texts for such a concept don't actually teach it when we look at them in their biblical context, perhaps it's this theology of an invisible rapture that needs to be left behind. That's all for this session, class. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our other Superhero Seminary videos here on the Disciple Dojo YouTube channel. If you like them, if you think they're ridiculous, if you think they're challenging, go ahead and subscribe and share them with other people. Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. We love to hear feedback. And again, for a much fuller and, well, a more serious look at this entire subject, be sure to check out the podcast series, Apocalypse Now, What the Bible Teaches About the End Times. It's entirely free here on the Disciple Dojo podcast. Go check it out.
Good morning, class. Welcome to Superhero Seminary. I'm your professor, He-Man. And as you probably already know, I have the power! What you may not know, though, is that according to the New Testament, so do Jesus' followers. In fact, this is exactly how Paul begins his most famous letter. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Now that word power in the original Greek is the word dunamis. Does it look familiar? It should. It's where we get the word dynamite from in English. So what Paul is basically saying is that the gospel is the dynamite of God. That's some serious power. You want to move a mountain? You need some of that gospel dynamite to blow up whatever stands between you and walking in God's abundance in your life. No wimpy, feminine gospel here, men. Our gospel has muscle. Our gospel has power. Because our gospel is God's dynamite. Touch your neighbor and say, give me some of that spirit TNT. Yeah! There's just one problem, class. None of what I just said is biblical at all. Why? Well, because of a little concept that is our theological fallacy term for today. Semantic anachronism.
But Professor He-Man, what is semantic anachronism?
Great question, Orko. My good friend Don Carson puts it like this. Semantic anachronism occurs when a late use of a word is read back into earlier literature. You see, when Paul used the Greek word dunamis, he was in no way thinking of dynamite, because dynamite wouldn't be invented until 1867 by Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel. Yep, that Alfred Nobel. Nobel was trying to create a safer and more stable alternative to nitroglycerin, and eventually came up with the formula for what we know of today as dynamite. Rumor has it he was going to name it something like Nobel's Safety Powder or Nobel's Blasting Powder, but ended up calling it dynamite based on, you guessed it, the Greek word for power, dunamis. But remember, class, this was 1,800 years after Paul wrote the letter to the Romans. In Paul's day, there was simply nothing even remotely like dynamite in existence.
But He-Man, what does dunamis actually mean in the Bible then?
Well, Orko, that all depends on the context in which it's being used. The most widely used New Testament Greek lexicon, a lexicon is just a fancy word for dictionary in another language, kids, gives the following definitions for dunamis. Potential for functioning in some way, ability to carry out something, a deed that exhibits ability to function powerfully.
something that serves as an adjunct of power, an entity or being, whether human or transcendent, that functions in a remarkable manner, the capacity to convey thought.
Okay, He-Man, but what about in the Septuagint? What does the word mean when it's found in the Old Testament?
I'm glad you asked, Orko. According to a Greek-English lexicon of the Septuagint, dunamis is defined as power, might, strength, ability, outward power, influence, authority, force for war, army, host, power, heavenly host, personal, supernatural, spirit, or angel.
That's a lot of semantic room, He-Man.
It sure is, my somewhat annoying little friend. And there's room for discussion about which of these semantic ranges Paul has in mind when he describes the gospel as the dunamis of God for salvation. But what he clearly does not mean is anything resembling the explosive invention we know of as dynamite. To imply that he does is not based on the Greek text, but rather on the preacher's imagination. And imagination is a good thing for mnemonic memorization of biblical words, but it's not so great if you're teaching the actual meaning of a word in Scripture.
Gee, He-Man, I've heard lots of preachers do this. Are there other examples of popular semantic anachronism that we should avoid?
There certainly are, Orko. You may have heard that God loves a hilarious giver. This one is based on the Greek word for cheerful in 2 Corinthians 9:7, hilaros, which is indeed where we get the later English word hilarious from. But hilaros in Scripture has nothing to do with comedic value. It simply means being full of cheer, cheerful, glad, happy. The fact that centuries later in another language there's a similar sounding word that means really, really, really funny is not evidence of some deeper meaning of the Bible. It's simply the normal process of how languages develop. The word for that is philology, kids.
Got it. Are there any others, He-Man?
There are many others, Orko. According to Ephesians 2:10, we are God's poetry.
What a beautiful image, He-Man. I'm a living poem written by God. I love it.
Well, Orko, you are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made by the divine artisan, but this passage is not calling you God's poetry.
Oh, man.
Yes, Orko, this too is just another example of the semantic anachronism fallacy. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And that Greek word is poema, which is where the later English word poem and poetry come from. But as lovely a thought as it is, Paul is not telling the Ephesians that they are God's poetry. He's telling them they are God's work, his creation, and as the work of the Creator, they were created and saved in order to produce good works themselves, regardless of any literary artistry that may be involved. Again, thinking of ourselves as God's poetry may make for a sweet inspirational post to accompany that heavily filtered Instagram selfie we want to share because we're feeling it today. But it's not what Ephesians is actually saying in Greek. Or here's another example you may come across. In some popular level Christian self-help books or teaching circles, biblical terms will be read with modern English meanings not even based on Hebrew or Greek words to begin with. So for instance, some Christian diet experts have taken Exodus 23:18 that says, "You will not sacrifice the blood of my sacrifice together with food with yeast. You will not leave the fat of my feast overnight until morning," as teaching something about how we should be exercising and thus offering our fat as a sacrifice to God through clean eating, like cutting carbs, and working out. Now, you know I believe in being in good shape.
Obviously, you're the strongest man I know, He-Man. Some would even say, like Barbie, you're the epitome of unrealistic body expectations for a whole generation of kids. Not me, of course, but some people.
Anyway, I'm all about lean muscle and low body fat, but as much as I think boys and girls should take care of their bodies and exercise, that has absolutely nothing to do with Exodus 23's discussion of Levitical sacrificial ritual in ancient Israel. Likewise, some people read Jesus' parable in Matthew 25 about the workers investing their talents and then make all kinds of sermon points about how we use our talent God has given us to glorify Him today. Again, this is a great thought, but the Greek word in that parable has nothing to do with one's skill set or natural abilities. It's simply the Greek word talenton, which is nothing more than a monetary unit that just happens to sound like the English word talent. Like I said, Orko, these are just a few examples of the fallacy known as semantic anachronism. There are many more out there, and they can often be heard in pulpits where the preacher makes a really big deal about what the Greek or the Hebrew actually says.
And while we here at Superhero Seminary absolutely believe wholeheartedly in the importance of the original languages in biblical preaching and teaching, we also know how easy it is to misuse those languages, especially when our listeners don't have the linguistic ability to fact check us. Once again, my friend Don summarizes it well. Perhaps the principal reason why word studies constitute a particularly rich source for exegetical fallacies is that many preachers and Bible teachers know Greek only well enough to use concordances, or perhaps a little more. There's a feel for Greek as a language, and so there's the temptation to display what one has learned and studied, which as often as not is a great deal of lexical information without the restraining influence of context. The solution, of course, is to learn more Greek, not less, and to gain at least a rudimentary knowledge of linguistics. Of course, this applies just as much to Hebrew and Aramaic as to Greek, but Don's a New Testament guy, so I won't hold such a glaring omission against him, because he's right. When it comes to preaching and teaching the inspired text of Scripture, we have to approach it with a level of homiletical humility appropriate to our level of hermeneutical knowledge.
What?
We shouldn't attempt to preach more about the languages than we actually know, Orko.
Gotcha.
We have to be on guard against the temptation to wow our audience with any hidden knowledge. And when we do appeal to the languages in teaching or preaching, we should do so in a way that is as transparent as possible, that equips and empowers God's people rather than mystifies or further distances them from what the text in context is actually saying. So remember, kids, the next time you hear a preacher or teacher talk about what a term actually means in the biblical languages, keep an ear out for semantic anachronism or many other word study fallacies.
But He-Man, I don't know Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. How can I be sure I'm not being misled?
Another great question, Orko. Aside from learning the basics of biblical languages, which is surprisingly less difficult than you may think, I'd say to always take a look at the passage in multiple English translations to see how different translators communicate the term. And tell the preacher or teacher that you're interested in the point they're making and ask them where you can read more about it. Not in an obnoxious or accusatory way, Orko. Just let them know you want to go deeper in your understanding of the passage or term itself. If they're a faithful and honest teacher, they will be happy to share more and encourage you in your study. And if they aren't, well, that should be a red flag. Then use whatever study tools you have available, such as blueletterbible.com, the Net Bible Translation Notes, a good Bible dictionary, or even a technical commentary on that particular passage itself from a legitimate scholar, to make sure that you're getting more from the biblical writers than from the homiletical ingenuity of the preacher. Remember, Orko, when it comes to fact-checking biblical language claims, you have the power! No explosions necessary. That's all for today, class. If you'd like to see some other examples of how biblical languages can be misunderstood or misinterpreted, check out the lectures here at Superhero Seminary by my colleagues Superman and Daredevil. Even that fur-brained Beastman has an episode worth watching, but don't tell Skeletor I said that. And if you have other examples of semantic anachronism that you've heard which we didn't cover, feel free to share them in the comments section below. After you click like and subscribe, of course. But if low-budget, ridiculous action figure parody isn't your thing, you or your small group can always take our 100% free course, Bible for the Rest of Us, here at Disciple Dojo. We go over this and other such fallacies used in interpreting the Bible. Links to each of these are in the description below, along with some other book resources that will help you in your biblical studies. That's it. So long, class.
Good morning, class. Welcome to Superhero Seminary. I'm Dr. Pym. You may know me as the original Ant-Man, co-founder of the Avengers. Now, unlike that shady ex-con Scott Lang who's running around in my suit now, I am an actual doctor. I hung up my uniform to pursue a life of research, but every now and then I break it out again to remember the good old days. And also because when you have something like this on your head, people take you seriously, right? Now, I wasn't always known as Ant-Man. Back in the 60s, I was also known as Giant Man. Thanks to the super secret Pym particles that I discovered, no big deal, I could not only shrink myself to the size of my ant friends, I could also grow to 10 feet tall, or with a lot of effort, even bigger. My record's 100 feet. Again, no big deal.
But as we can all agree, Giant Man is a pretty lame name for a superhero. So I changed my clothes, threw on some sweet blue blocker shooting glasses, and started calling myself Goliath. I mean, that seemed like a fitting name, given that I had grown up reading my King James Bible about the famous giant Philistine who was nearly 10 feet tall and terrified Israel. Can you name a more famous giant in history? I can't. So Goliath just seemed like a natural fit for my 10-foot tall self. But then as I started spending more time studying Old Testament text criticism and primary sources from the ancient world, after I mastered biochemistry, I once again discovered something fascinating. Goliath was not nearly 10 feet tall. He wasn't even 9 feet tall or even 8 feet tall. He was actually around 7 feet tall or maybe shorter. What do you mean, Dr. Pym? My Bible clearly says that he was over 9 feet tall. Look, it's right there. And when I turn to the Hebrew Bible, it says it right here, 6 cubits and a span. Now, first of all, we need to clarify these measurement terms. A cubit was roughly the distance from your elbow to your fingertips, about this long. And a span was the length between your thumb and your forefinger, like this long. Now, of course, you see the problem with this form of measuring, don't you? Different people have different size cubits and spans. So right off the bat, we have to note that measurements in the ancient world before standardized rulers are hard to pin down with mathematical precision. But we can say a cubit was somewhere in the neighborhood of 17.5 inches. So 6 cubits and a span ends up being somewhere between 9 and 10 feet in the modern imperial measurement system, or nearly 3 meters for those of you outside of America, Liberia, and Myanmar. So that settles it, right? The Hebrew text says 6 cubits in a span, so Goliath was over 9 feet tall. Well, not so fast, true believer. Look at that little footnote by the word for 6 in any critical edition of the Hebrew Bible. You see that? It says that while the Leningrad Codex, which is the oldest copy of the full Hebrew text, says 6, another Hebrew manuscript says 16. Whoa, that's almost 25 feet. Well, the Leningrad Codex only dates back to around 1000 AD, give or take a few years. So are there older versions we can consult to help clear this up? Indeed there are. The Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was done before the time of Jesus, has always read 4 cubits in a span. See? It's right there if you read Greek. And when talking about Goliath's height, the Jewish historian of the 1st century Josephus has also always read 4 cubits in a span. But typically translators have favored the Hebrew reading of the Masoretic text, which is preserved in the Leningrad Codex and medieval manuscripts, over Greek translations. But sometimes the Greek preserves the original correct reading. And in the case of 1 Samuel 17:4, that is what has happened. How do I know this, you ask? Well, in 1947, a shepherd boy was throwing rocks into random caves in the cliffside near the Dead Sea. And he heard a crashing sound when one of them landed inside the mouth of a particular cave he was aiming at. When he climbed up to investigate, it turned out he had inadvertently discovered a trove of scrolls sealed in clay pots. You may know them as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they dated all the way back to the time of Jesus. Now, among these scrolls were copies of almost every book in the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew. The magnitude of this discovery cannot be overstated. It gave Hebrew Bible scholars a massive leap back in time, allowing them to see a Hebrew scriptural tradition that was 1,000 years older than the oldest known Hebrew text that existed. Well, what does this have to do with Goliath's height? A lot, actually, because the Dead Sea Scrolls reading of 1 Samuel 17:4 in Hebrew says 4 cubits and a span. Sometime in that 1,000-year period between when the Dead Sea Scrolls were written down and when the Masoretic text was compiled, the 4 cubits in a span got changed to 6 cubits in a span, or 16 cubits in a span. One Greek manuscript even has 5 cubits in a span. So wait, if Goliath was only 4 cubits in a span, that's not even 7 feet tall, why would he ever be called a giant? I mean, there are plenty of people taller than that even today. You're ruining the most famous story in the Bible, Dr. Pym. That's probably what you're thinking, but I assure you Goliath was indeed a giant, and a fearsome one at that. I mean, just the description and measurements of his gear alone is enough to establish that. He was a terrifying behemoth of a man, and in fact, that's actually part of how we know he wasn't over 9 feet tall. What do I mean? Well, consider this. The tallest human in modern recorded history was Robert Wadlow. He measured 8 feet 11 inches before he died. But like most humans who exceed 7 feet, his frame made it difficult for him to move, and he was racked with health problems as a result of his gigantism.
And this is due to basic physics. There is an upper limit to how large a human body can be and still function with any amount of strength and agility. The upper limit seems to be around 7 feet. That's why you see many NBA players between, say, 6'6" and 7'2" who are strong and fast and explosive in terms of their athleticism. But most who are taller than that are vastly slower, less agile, and much more awkward in terms of overall movement. It's very unlikely anyone over 7.5 feet tall would be capable of effectively wielding the weapons that Goliath is described as wielding in 1 Samuel 17. So they might be tall, but they wouldn't be very intimidating. The only way someone nearly 10 feet tall would be able to even function in combat is if he was powered by PIM particles, which of course Goliath was not. And just so you know, even with my PIM particle power, there were many times where my being 10 feet tall was actually a liability rather than a blessing in battle against some of the Avengers' foes. Now at this point, you might say, well, the Bible is full of miracles that can't be explained by natural laws of science, Dr. Pym, so maybe Goliath was supernaturally agile. And of course, you'd be correct, except a basic rule of faithful biblical interpretation is that we should not multiply miracles where the text does not require them. And in the case of Goliath's height, there's no need to try and convince skeptics how a person taller than Robert Wadlow could have not only lived, but also have become a renowned warrior. But there are tons of people today who are that tall. How can you say Goliath was a giant if he was no bigger than a typical NBA forward? Well, I assure you, Goliath was still very much a giant, because the average height of a full-grown Hebrew male around the time of King David in 1000 BC was 5 foot 3 inches. Stand LeBron James, in full battle armor and massive weaponry no less, next to Kevin Hart, with a stick and a few sling stones. Picture that, and you'll get an idea of what the Israelites in Saul's camp were witnessing that fateful day. Goliath was indeed a giant, and David's victory over him is no less of a miracle. In fact, it's more of a miracle given how physically handicapped a 10-foot-tall Goliath would have been in battle. Unfortunately, most modern English translations have taken into account the text-critical findings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and continue to do so since not all the scrolls have even been translated yet, much less published. But the Net Bible in particular has an excellent note on this verse, and I recommend reading it after class. I'll even put a link to it in the description below this video. But unfortunately, tradition is hard to change, especially when you start messing with people's favorite Bible stories. Attempting to correct a reading as well known as this will often be met with charges of not taking the Bible seriously, or denying the inspired word of God, or distorting scripture. This is why most translations simply leave the Masoretic text as the primary reading, and if they note the more accurate Septuagint, Dead Sea Scroll, Josephus reading at all, it's usually relegated to a footnote that most Bible readers gloss over without noticing. But in the end, the original text by the original author is what makes up inspired scripture, not any subsequent translation or transmission of that text. Now, if that concerns you, I recommend you go take Disciple Dojo's free Bible for the Rest of Us course, which I'll also include a link to below, and which helps walk people through the issues involved in translation, interpretation, and inspiration of Scripture. It's absolutely free to anyone, including the downloadable course workbook. It's really good. You should go take it. Seriously. Click on the link. So when it comes to the story of David and Goliath, what are we saying? Well, there's just no need for fanciful, pseudo-scientific theories to try and explain how someone over 9 feet tall could exist to begin with, much less be such a formidable warrior. We don't need to. The Goliath of Scripture was a far more formidable foe than the later exaggerated versions that made their way into the cultural consciousness. So does any of this change the message of the story of David and Goliath? Not at all. If anything, it grounds it more in the reality of what fearsome ancient Near East combat would entail, and why David's victory as an untrained shepherd boy was nothing short of miraculous. And pay more attention to the footnotes in your Bible translations. They're there for a reason. These scholars do a lot of work. They spend years and years combing through ancient manuscripts, looking at parchment and vellum and old text through a magnifying glass. All of this so that we can have reliable translations that communicate the Word of God. Go back and reread the text sometimes from stories that you remember from the Bible in your childhood. You may be surprised at what you find when you do. That's all for today, class. I'm Dr. Pym saying goodbye from Superhero Seminary. If you enjoyed this session and you found it interesting, intriguing, or entertaining, go ahead and check out our other videos here at Superhero Seminary. My colleagues cover a wealth of information in these short, easy to understand, highly shareable videos that are meant to equip, engage, and empower people to go deeper in their understanding of Scripture, which is, of course, the goal of the ministry here at Disciple Dojo. If you'd like to support this ministry, the best thing you can do is click that little subscribe button down below and like and share our videos. We hope to grow our audience continually as we reach more people around the world in unique and creative ways. For more information on Disciple Dojo, see the link in the description below and consider partnering with us as a monthly dojo donor so that we can keep making more ridiculous and fun videos like this.
At ease, class. I'm Professor 117. You can call me Master Chief, or Chief. I'm not really picky when it comes to titles. Today we're going to be talking about Halo. Plural. Now some of you may be under the impression that when a person dies, if they were really good, they go to heaven, become an angel, earn their wings, and are given a nice shiny halo. Whether you pick this up from a Renaissance painting or old episodes of Dragon Ball Z, as a resident professor of all things Halo related here at Superhero Seminary, let me go ahead and say up front that this has absolutely no basis whatsoever in either the Bible or actual Christian tradition. It is 100% theologically inaccurate, and it's my job as reclaimer of biblical truth to set the record straight. So what does the Bible actually teach? Well, for starters, humans and angels are two entirely separate classes of being in both Old and New Testament. Now it's true that the Hebrew and Greek words for angel, malak, and angelos, respectively, have no inherent supernatural connotation. Both terms simply mean messenger. The only way to tell whether a specific malak, angelos, in a passage of scripture is human or divine is by context. But in English, the term angel eventually came to refer exclusively to supernatural beings who serve God. As the Dictionary of Demons and Deities puts it, it is only in later texts in the Old Testament and everywhere in Apocryphal and New Testament texts that the words malak and angelos become generic terms for any of God's supernatural assistants, whether they functioned as messengers or not. When English borrowed the term angel from Greek, it was not in its earlier sense of messenger, but in its later sense of any supernatural being under God's authority. But despite the English usage, in the Old Testament, angels were often initially mistaken for people. Only after something bizarre or inexplicable happened did the person realize they were dealing with someone supernatural. You can see this in the story of Abraham and the three angelic visitors in Genesis 18 and 19, for example. That story's wild. There are other times when obviously supernatural beings are encountered, like the cherubim in Ezekiel or the seraphim in Isaiah, but they're not called angels. And instead of looking human, they resemble various hybrid animal creatures. In fact, it's safe to say the angels in the Bible that look like normal people never have wings. And the angels that do have wings never look like normal people. There's a lot more that could be said about all the angelic beings in the Bible and the extra biblical speculation that multiplied within various Jewish traditions during the intertestamental period. But for today's session, I just want to make two things clear. Number one, none of the actual angels in the Bible are people who died and went to heaven. Number two, no one, human or angelic, ever receives a halo. The first falsehood likely comes from people taking Jesus' analogy in Luke 20 about the nature of life and the resurrection as a literal description. In this passage, Jesus was given a hypothetical scenario by members of the Sadducee faction, a sect within first century Judaism that believed there was no life after this one. In answering them, Jesus affirmed that the resurrection will not just be a return to the way things are in this life. Rather, it will be a categorically different form of bodily existence from what we currently experience. Look, right here in Luke 20, 34 through 36. And Jesus said to them, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy to attain that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For they are not even able to die any longer, because they are like the angels and are sons of God, because they are sons of the resurrection." Now notice that Jesus never says people become angels. Rather, he says, when it comes to marriage and mortality, God's resurrected people will be like angels. Both the act of getting married and the act of dying will no longer occur in that final resurrected state that the prophets looked forward to. I'll let you wrestle with the theological and anthropological implications of Jesus' words on your own, as they definitely push the bounds of what we are capable of imagining in this life. But the simple truth is, class, that neither Jesus nor anyone else in Scripture ever teaches that people become angels when they die. In fact, the New Testament is emphatic in declaring that humans are destined for something that exceeds even what angels experience now. Look at Hebrews 1:14. Are they not all spirits engaged in special service, sent on assignment for the sake of those who are going to inherit salvation? Those who are going to inherit salvation, that's us, humans. Those who are spirits engaged in service, that's the angels. Or look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3. Do you not know that we will judge angels? Not to mention ordinary matters. Paul's telling the Corinthians they should be capable of settling disputes among themselves, because in the resurrection, they're going to be judging even over the angels. While we can only speculate what such judging will entail, it is a basic truth of the Bible that the only beings in all creation said to bear the imago Dei, the image of God, are human beings, not angels, not cherubim, not seraphim, not anything in the animal world. Humans and humans alone have this distinction in the Bible. So as hard as it is to imagine, according to Scripture, becoming an angel when you die would actually be a demotion in status than what God has planned at the resurrection for all who bear his image. So to reiterate point number 1, no one becomes an angel when they die. As for point number 2, no one, human or angel, ever earns their halo, or wings for that matter. I know this goes against practically everything you've ever been taught in art, books, movies, and TV, but it's true. The floating rings that we now call halos began as an attempt by ancient artists to somehow visually communicate, quote, the lustrous countenance and apparel of awesome otherworldly beauty, as the New Bible Dictionary puts it, described in certain key biblical moments, such as Moses' radiant face after being in God's presence, the angels who appeared to the shepherds in Bethlehem, or even the face of Stephen at his trial. Early Christian artists would depict various angelic or holy individuals with a solid disc behind them that was supposed to symbolize this divine radiance. Why did they choose a disc? Well, probably because painting glowing light is really hard. I mean, this was before such artistic concepts as perspective and foreshortening had even been discovered, so cut them some slack. They did the best they could. Gradually, these flat golden discs started to be depicted as hollow rings, and eventually, they were detached and moved from directly behind the subject's face to floating above their head. Because they had been a part of Christian art for centuries, and because most people simply don't read or study the Bible in much detail, the halo came to be associated with holy individuals. And since it was also associated with angels, the folk theology notion that saints become angels when they die gradually arose. As for how the overwhelmingly terrifying sphinx-like creatures known as cherubim ended up being depicted as fat, naked baby archers with wings, honestly, I'm still trying to figure that one out. It makes even less sense than halos. But when it comes to what the Bible actually depicts, people becoming angels and earning their halo is in the same category as things like heaven being made out of clouds, St. Peter being the heavenly bouncer, Satan carrying a pitchfork and being red and having a tail and hooves, or that Satan once was a heavenly choir director named Lucifer. For that last one, see the Superhero Seminary session by my colleague Professor Murdoch. All of these are folk theology concepts that neither the Bible nor Orthodox Christian theology actually teach. I hope this helps in your theological training. We'll see you next time back here at Superhero Seminary. Dismissed. If you enjoyed this session and found it helpful, go ahead and click the subscribe button. And if you liked it, click like. And if you really liked it, go tell someone else about Superhero Seminary and send them a link to this playlist. The best way to help get the word out is through word of mouth. I'm Professor 117. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time back here in Superhero Seminary.
Okay, nerds, listen up. I'm Sensei Lawrence. All the superheroes were busy this week, so you get me instead, which is better because you don't have to look at some dude in spandex tights, so you're welcome. Now, some of you may know my story, at least those of you who don't live in a cave or under a rock. Netflix can catch you up to speed if you do, but basically, I was the poster boy for a totally badass... Well, I forgot, this is a seminary. I have to watch my language, I guess. Where was I? Yeah, I was the All-Valley Karate champ representing a dojo called Cobra Kai. We were the best. Our instructor, Sensei Kreese, taught us all sorts of macho alpha male stuff, and we ate it up. Because we were teenage boys in the 80s, aka the greatest decade in human history. One of the lessons Kreese hammered into our heads every class was no mercy. Mercy is for the weak. Showing mercy would get you kicked off the team and possibly assaulted by a grown man in the parking lot of a major karate tournament. Well, that philosophy was all well and good until this skinny little punk from Jersey and his old Okinawan Jedi master showed up and beat our whole team after literally only a month of waxing cars and playing with chopsticks. Johnny, come on. You know that's not what Miyagi-Do training really is. Quiet, LaRusso, this is my lecture. So anyway, class, it was humiliating, I'm not gonna lie. But after that fight, I realized that pretty much everything Kreese had taught us was total baloney. Now, it would be years before LaRusso and I could even stand to be in the same room without wanting to kick each other in the head, but I never forgot the look on Kreese's face that night Mr. Miyagi showed him mercy. I realized right then and there that mercy is definitely not for the weak. But I could have learned this a lot sooner if I'd ever bothered to crack open my Bible. There's tons of stuff about mercy in there, but a lot of times we miss it because the Hebrew word doesn't have an exact English equivalent, so it gets translated a bunch of different ways that aren't nearly as as insightful. So we can easily miss how often mercy pops up in the Bible if we don't know what words to look for. So we gotta look at the Hebrew. Yeah, I bet you didn't know old Johnny knows biblical Hebrew, huh? Well, that's what you get for stereotyping. I may not know how to work a computer or a smartphone, but that doesn't mean I'm illiterate. So one of the most prominent words for mercy in the Hebrew Bible is this word, chesed. Say it, class, chesed. You gotta pronounce it like you're trying to hock up a big loogie to spit on some nerd who just disrespected you at a beach party in front of Allie and all her friends. Oh man, Allie. What a babe. I had such a thing for her back in the day. Be honest, if you're a dude over 40 watching this, you did too. Where was I? Oh yeah, chesed. It doesn't have a single English equivalent, so sometimes it's translated with the totally lame sounding words like kindness, steadfast love, loving kindness, etc. But most of the time in the Septuagint, it's translated with the Greek word eleos, mercy. And far from being for the weak, it's actually a foundational characteristic of the big man himself. Think back to when God appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai after the Exodus. Moses asks if he can see God's face. God says he can't see his face, but he can see his back. And when he passes by, he lets Moses know exactly what type of God he is. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in chesed and faithfulness, maintaining chesed to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. That's Exodus 34, 6 through 7. And both times in that passage, chesed usually gets translated as love in many modern Bibles, but it's way more than hearts and puppy dogs. Remember, Israel had just broken the covenant and worshipped a golden cow while Moses was on that fiery mountain above them getting the rest of the covenant laws. God threatens to wipe them all out, but Moses falls on his face and begs for God to show them mercy, and God does. Then, in this passage, he lets Moses know that while he is a God who punishes rebellion and sin, in comparison to his punishment, his chesed is thousands of times greater. And keep in mind, this is the same God who just a few months before destroyed the army of the most powerful empire in human history at the time. How metal is that? And in Moses' power ballad response, probably played with the ancient Near East equivalent of a sweet guitar solo, he says, in your chesed, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. See that, nerds? Chesed is strength, not weakness. We know that because of the parallelism in Hebrew poetry. Even in the Bible, though, some people don't see it that way. They want God to show them chesed, but they resent when he shows it to others. There's a whole book of the Bible named after one of these guys. Remember Jonah? Why was he in the fish? Because he'd rather drown in the sea than go preach to Nineveh. And why is that? Because he was scared of the big bad Assyrians? That's how it got told to me as a kid, but that's totally wrong. Jonah straight up says why he didn't want to go to Nineveh. Look at Jonah chapter 3 verse 10. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious, compassionate God, slow to anger, and abounding in chesed, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it's better for me to die than to live. Man, Jonah would have been right at home in Cobra Kai. He didn't want the Ninevites to receive mercy, chesed. He wanted them to burn. They had bullied his people and many others, so he was hoping they'd get a God-sized fiery crane kick to the collective face once and for all. But God had other plans. The God of Jonah is the God of Moses, the God whose foundational attitude is one of chesed. And because he is full of chesed, he expects his people likewise to mirror this chesed in the world. Kittle puts it this way, on the part of a superior, chesed also includes grace, This is particularly so on God's part. God has freely bound himself to his people, and the righteous may thus depend on his chesed as they themselves show mercy. And that's another important thing to know, nerds. Chesed is more than just not giving someone the throat punch they deserve. It's actively doing good for them and actively showing them kindness in tangible ways. It's an action, not just a feeling. In fact, the article on chesed in the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament says it more eloquently and seminary-like. 3 elements constitutive of the chesed concept. It is active, social, and enduring. Chesed always designates not just a human attitude, but also the act that emerges from this attitude. It is an act that preserves or promotes life. It is the intervention on behalf of someone suffering misfortune or distress. It is demonstration of friendship or piety. It pursues what is good and not what is evil. So this is why all those words like love, steadfast love, loyalty, devotion, kindness, and loving kindness are used to translate chesed in our modern Bibles. It's all of those things and more. But as my friend Ben Witherington argues in his recent Biblical Theology, chesed most often seems to mean exactly what the Septuagint suggested, compassion or mercy, which are qualities needed by those who have failed, sinned, or are in dire circumstances and need help. And this is good news for a screw-up like me. My former Cobra Kai teammate turned preacher, Bobby, has been trying to get me to see all this over these past few years. And it's something I think even our buddy Tommy learned before they finally put him in that body bag. Despite Crease's brainwashing when we were kids, they finally realized what I've come to realize as well. Chesed is the opposite of weakness, class. Proverbs 20:28 says, chesed and faithfulness keep a king safe. Through chesed, his throne is made secure. Does that sound weak to you? Proverbs 21:21, whoever pursues righteousness and chesed finds life, prosperity, and honor. Yeah, Sensei Kreese talked about honor, but his warped mind had no idea that honor comes through mercy, not beating people up. That's what Hosea said. Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There is no faithfulness, no chesed, no knowledge of God in the land. There's only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Mercy is everything, nerds. We've been shown more mercy by God than we can ever hope to show others. Jesus told a whole parable about this to make it clear that not showing mercy will result in mercy not being shown to us on Judgment Day. If you don't believe me, go read it for yourself, Matthew chapter 18. Now, if you know me, you know I've been known to brag from time to time. But what I've learned the older I get is it's not the bragging that's wrong. It's what we're bragging about that matters. Jeremiah said it. This is what the Lord says. Let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches. But let the one who boasts boast about this, that they have the understanding to know me, that I am the Lord who does chesed, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. When it's all said and done, chesed is the thing God desires most to see reflected in his people. He says through Hosea, for I desire chesed, not sacrifice, and knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. You see that, nerds? Nothing we can give to God is more valuable than us doing chesed. And not just doing it, but loving to do it. Like Micah says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love chesed and to walk humbly with your God. So forget all that fake macho alpha nonsense about mercy being for the weak, unless you're ready to stand up and call the king of the universe a beta. No, nerds, mercy, chesed, is one of the strongest weapons you'll ever wield. Class dismissed. If you like this video, use your dweeby computer knowledge to subscribe to this channel and tell your geek friends about it. And there are lots of other sessions by actual nerdy spandex wearing superheroes on a whole bunch of other rad stuff here, so go check those out too.